Okay, we're at time. Let us bring this meeting to order and begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to give our usual reminder to speak into the mics tonight. So far, we've been doing a wonderful job, we are told, so let's keep our streak going. In terms of absences, Mackenzie Murphy, Rachel Papke, and Heather Robitaille are excused. In addition to our usual illustrious members of the audience from the district administration and those who are presenting tonight, we also have Lori Rothaus here, who is a member of the board and is visiting, so thank you for being here as well. I will open public participation. Okay, seeing no one coming forward, I will close public participation. Do any committee members want to make suggestions for changes or additions to our agenda this evening? Okay, we will continue as it stands. For prior meeting follow-ups, you have a number of items in your packet that you have also received through email. We have responses from student services regarding the requests for information. I want to get the right things here on the YES program, which I consistently misspell, alternatively YEES or YESS. So my apologies on that. I'll try to learn to get it right at some point in time. And memberships that are part of the budget line specific to that. We also have a reply on the athletic uniforms and the rotation of purchasing for them. I have my own update on what I'm calling technology differentiation, the information that we were talking about having a bit of a tough time figuring out what goes into the technology line and what goes elsewhere. When I was looking at the budget, again, if you look line by line, you'll notice that what we call the technology budget does not appear with that line name. The line name is technology infrastructure. And so I think that begins to give us the answer that we're looking for, that the quote unquote technology budget is intended for the infrastructure and other items will tend to be elsewhere in the budget. That's not a perfect answer, we still want more, but it's a beginning of sorting out those two. We also had a written description or re-elucidation that we asked for regarding the budget surplus and how it is handled. Does anybody want to have any questions on that? Do you want to talk it through, or was it sufficient? Sufficient? Okay, I think you escaped that one, Matt. Excellent. We'll get you later. Okay.
Waiting for you, Mr. Coker.
Also in your packet is the updated table of requests. And as always, if you have things that you would like to have on here, let me know, whether in meeting or outside of it. We're coming to the end of the information gathering part of our season, what I'm calling our season, which means that if you're going to have anything else that you need to know in order to make these decisions, now's the time to ask folks to bring it forward. Because we're going to need it as we go. At the end of the meeting, I will also be asking if there's anybody you want to invite to the working session on February 6th, if there are other individuals you want to hear from again, and we can have that conversation then, and move that forward. Okay, for department budget presentations, let us begin with food services. And David Siki.
Uh-oh, they're bringing the big guns.
Just a reminder, none of the stacks that you have in front of you have been provided for you by the food service program. They're totally donated.
That's
and
true.
That is true.
100% donation, no obligation.
Awesome.
We'll verify that.
And and I believe that leading this from the board perspective, the committee
Yes.
perspective, is Dan Coakley.
Yes. And I'd like to point out that it's an honor to fill in for an esteemed member of this committee. And you got it, pal. The Food Services meeting was held at the Food Services office at 12 p.m. on January 24th, 2024. As a member of this community since 1977, I have to tell you that I didn't ever realize that that white building was there until I walked into it. Attending were myself and David. Rachel had submitted 2 questions to be asked. We decided with the size of the budget that Dave would go through it line by line. We would deal with any questions as they came up. Rachel's questions would be addressed at the end. Before he started, David gave us a gestalt view of the Food Services Department. They serve all the schools in the district. They follow the federal nutritional guidelines with 5 components. Although the district does provide free and reduced meals, they're reimbursed by the federal government for those meals. They get $128,000 of commodities from the Department of Defense monthly for $3.75 shipping. They get fruits and vegetables weekly. They're audited yearly. One of the biggest challenges is projecting food costs a year out and trying to gauge, where the commodities are going to go, what prices are going to be. The food service equipment repair line, it's hard to predict because the need for repairs is needed. It's flat funded. The vehicle repair line has a bit of a buffer because of unanticipated repairs in the past. The food services travel budget, the increase is usually due to increased mileage reimbursement. The supplies, some of these increases come from COVID times, specifically with, if you can believe it, a styrofoam shortage, which has now been virtually eliminated. Styrofoam. The food and milk, the increases are due to the increasing enrollments. There have also been increases even with the buying collaboratives. Gas and oil, any increases here would be due to fluctuating costs. If you've seen the price of gas and the way it's been, you can see how that would be an issue. The technology SVC con, the Jason question again came up here. But David explained that the food services budget is required to be separated from the district. He also indicated that Jason is involved in all the technology decisions. The food replacement equipment line is for the replacement of 4 ovens in each of 2 schools. In the middle school, the ovens have been there since the school was built. We think that's 20 years or so. In the elementary school, if you can believe it, the ovens are 50 years old. 50 years old. Removal of the old ovens was included in the cost. The increase this year was to replace a surplus freezer at the Mastrocola complex. The freezer was the size of an average room. Rachel asked 2 questions. The first question was, has the department or district looked into other food service software other than My School Bucks to facilitate management of student accounts? If not, how often is this software evaluated? If so, were there other options that may offer less fees to families for loading funds onto their children's account if paying online? The answer was, we haven't really looked into any other programs. There are few, if any, increased funds to parents. Transactions can be made individually for multiple students. The amounts can be carried from one student to another, so if one graduates and has a sibling, they can transfer that. And if no more students coming, the parents get a refund. Rachel's second question was, how is the revenue calculation projected for the 24-25 school year? What accounts does this revenue support? Looking at the total food service object requested budget, less the food services revenue, there's about a $98,000 not covered by the revenue. Is this typical to have certain percentage not covered? And if so, how is that determined? There does not appear to be a direct correlation between food, beverage line item totals to the total projected revenue. David quickly responded that this was a Matt question. I stopped in central office right after the meeting, and Matt was out. I sent the question to him, and he responded that afternoon. Thank you, sir. That was admirable. And if you got a copy of that, the total food services budget was $1,595,285. The total revenue, food service sales, was $1,495,285. Federal reimbursement was $80,000. State reimbursement was $20,000 for the total revenues $1,595,285, which is a total offset. This is the only revenue generating thing in this budget. They're doing a great job. And the response from you, Matt, was so quick and it's appreciated. David, thank you for taking enough time out of your busy schedule. He came in off the road to meet with me and immediately went out on the road because I followed him out. So I'm real happy with the way this budget is, and I'll submit it on behalf of myself, Mr. Moore, and Rachel.
Thank you very much. Would you care to build on that?
Yeah, I just want to kind of reiterate what Mr. Coakley was talking about. The food service is a special revenue fund. It's Fund 400 in the book. All his accounts begin with 400. General fund is 100. I forget what the other federal funds is something else. It could be 401, 402, something like that. But regardless, this is a special revenue fund. Revenues have to equal expenditures. There is no burden to the taxpayers on this other than them paying their school lunches or us getting federal reimbursement. You know, the things wash out. He does have a surplus. When I did my budget year-end review for last year in November, I believe, he finished the year with like probably around a $300,000 surplus. And that surplus is carried over and maintained to take care of any of the large capital expenditures that Dave has in his budget. So if he needs a new freezer, if he needs a new whatever, that surplus can be used for such. You know, if something breaks down in the middle of the year, and it's usually when he has a freezer or something or whatever, we're not talking $500 going to Best Buy and get one. We're talking thousands and thousands of dollars. And some of these items are custom built for him specifically. So it's a special revenue fund. Revenues and expenditures wash out, no effect to the tax rate, but it is incorporated in the total budget number in the budget warrant article. It is added in there because we have to budget on a gross basis. Years ago, some districts would make their budget look lower by not counting food service. They would just forget about it altogether because it paid for itself. But that was changed probably 25 years ago. So you had to budget for the expenditures and the appropriate corresponding revenues. So, Dave, with that, I will hand it over to you.
All right, thank you.
How long you been here with us, Dave?
30 years.
30 years. So he has definitely earned his stripes in this district.
Thank you. And Dan, I think I misquoted on the age of the ovens at the upper elementary. They're probably more like 70 years old. I was thinking, hard to believe it's 2024, but they've probably been there since the 50s.
Can't you get a few more years out of them, for God's sakes?
I mean, me, myself, you know, I've been here for 23 years. I still refer to it as the new middle school.
Yes.
So, you know, it's kind of one of these things that just happens to you.
Absolutely. And again, I appreciate you guys inviting me here tonight. And as far as Dan did an excellent job doing the overview. And I would take questions if anybody has questions.
Matt, thank you, Dave. You had answered a part of it. The surplus is what's used to pay for the equipment. I'm not sure how much that is, but does it make sense to start a fund for some of this equipment going forward? I just don't want to see the surplus
Like
run
a
out.
capital reserve fund?
Just, yeah, 'cause it's a pretty critical, I mean, food service is critical.
Yeah,
so I
we
just-
definitely, what we do is we wait until, we try and build that reserve up. And once it gets to around 300,000, then we look to replace items that need replacement. So we don't historically have capital reserve funds out of the general fund for food service. It's all on the back of the program and the money it collects and the money it collects from the federal and state government. So, yeah, so far he's doing well. During the COVID years, we did have to supplement food service, like maybe $100,000 from the general fund to balance it out. But that's the first time ever we've done that since I've been here. And that's a testament to how Dave runs his program. So right now, he's sitting with a pretty good surplus to take care of any emergency items that we have. So we feel pretty confident that we're in a good spot right now.
Thank you.
Just an observation, Matt. I'm Dan. Mr. Coakley was my father.
Can that, building on that surplus, can that surplus replace the ovens that are needed, the $50,000 budget item that you have now? Could that money be used for that?
Yes.
In a roundabout way, it will be. Let's say Dave doesn't have a surplus or he breaks even, then it could be used for that. It all depends, but not specifically for it. But if he has a slow year and he's $50,000 in the red, he's going to pull that from the surplus to balance him out.
This is just for myself because I know in the last couple of years, are all the vehicles good now? Because you needed them to move food from
We only
building to
have one
building.
vehicle, but I pray every day when I come to work that it's still running.
Because I know that
Yeah.
we've talked about that before, and I was like, I hope he got the vehicle fixed. That's all.
Well, and some of the expense that was, that Dan had talked about, it was a little bit over budget last year because I told him I tuned it up and I got new brakes and new tires and everything else that I
Right.
wanted to get done to it, so.
Full
yeah,
disclosure, I didn't
yeah.
even look at your section because it's a necessity. So,
Yeah, yep. So we're right now, good shape with the
oh, good.
vehicle.
Okay.
I have one question. It's not actually specifically related to the foodstuffs themselves, but Matt, could you talk a little bit more? You've talked about a surplus in this regard, and it sounds like that has different meaning here than when we're talking about because you're retaining funds but not through a general fund. Talk a little about that.
Yeah, because it's called a special revenue account. So it's like it's funded by the revenue that it brings in. If it brings in more revenue than it has expenditures, then it creates a surplus for itself. Automatically, that is retained until we expend it. It's not like what we're doing in the general fund because up until 3 years ago, we couldn't do that. If you were a town, you could retain surplus automatically. When I started working in a school district in 1998, coming from a town, that's the first thing I wanted to do is to retain some surplus. And I was told by the Department of Revenue Administration and my auditors, you can't do that. And I says, why can't I do that? Because you're a school. I says, well, where does it say in the RSAs that I can't do that? It doesn't. Where does it say in the RSAs that a town can? It doesn't. So how come I can't have the same flexibility that I had in retaining surplus when I worked 20 miles down the road for a town, and now I'm working for a school district? So there are different nuances, but his surplus has always been able to be retained. It's not subject to the same rules and guidelines.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Gina.
Hi there. This may be a very stupid question, but no, there are such thing as stupid questions, I know.
We'll witness one right now, maybe.
Yeah, be nice. If we have all this extra revenue and surplus, why are you still driving your personal vehicle? I would think that I mean, this is so important. You know, why could we not supply a vehicle?
Don't know.
Yeah, quite frankly, that's something we never really considered.
And I
You-
don't travel very far, so I didn't think it was something that's necessary. It's probably one more thing to service, so. If I do travel, I get reimbursement for mileage. I think
It's still personal wear and tear on your own
It's true,
vehicle.
yeah.
Just
No, that's an excellent
thought.
question. It's definitely something for further future discussion.
see, it wasn't a stupid question.
No, of course not. I would think you would never do such a thing, Mrs. Groff, you know. So, anyway, yeah, I think that's a good idea. It's something to look at, do a little cost-benefit analysis on it. You know, maybe you and our transportation coordinator, Desmond, who puts in mileage,
you.
because, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying you're gonna use the same vehicle, okay? You're gonna use different vehicles. Carpool, they're gonna carpool, right? Because he goes around to bus stops and everything like that, so I've kind of thought about him, because he racks on much more mileage than Dave does. But that would be something to consider for both of them, perhaps, in the future. It's a good idea.
Matt, there are some of us on this committee that are a little disappointed that we haven't seen capital reserve planning come to us. I know over the years it's been on and off and off and on, but there's nothing more fundamental to our best interests than capital reserve planning, and we haven't seen any come forward. And that's just a reflection on my part.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. When I was on the town side, we had a capital reserve account for communications console. We had it for fire trucks, because fire trucks $500,000, so you got to build up for those large expenses. We did have capital reserve accounts in this school district. We had one for paving, we had one for roofing, we had one for asbestos. We have 2 capital reserve accounts right now. One for special education in case we get any out-of-district tuitions that are unexpected. That's going to sink our special ed budget. There's around $500,000 in there. And then we also have one for emergency equipment repairs for Mr. Tussaud in case something happens to one of the schools, around $500,000 in that too. But the ongoing ones that we used to have for roofs, well, we don't need asbestos anymore because we're kind of done with that. But for paving especially, you know, I think we were playing catch up all these years, and we were trying to be a little bit too conservative with trying to not tax the taxpayers with putting these out. But I think we're going to start thinking about that in a different light in the future, because it does make sense, and I totally agree with you. You know, I'm a firm believer in that. The town has a wonderful capital reserve improvement program going on. I wish we had the same, and we will have the same at some point in time.
Well, I'm sure we'll be waiting patiently for it.
You can wait till next year. We'll
Yes.
start then.
That's pretty patient, actually. Also, I would like to simply make note that the state of Minnesota has become the first state in the United States to guarantee all students free lunch.
Very nice.
And
So,
breakfast,
uh,
and breakfast.
I don't know, obviously, how it has been arranged, but I think it's important to note that they're pioneering something that has long been determined to be in the best interests of children's health and well-being, and education, and that there are other solutions to many of the problems that we experience, instead of simply saying that's how it's always been done.
Well, you know, to kind of take that a step further, I got to walk back in time a little bit. When we did have the COVID, you remember the lunches we were providing out here, going up O'Gara Drive, coming in front of the high school. We had food service personnel handing out bag lunches to people. The response there was absolutely overwhelming, you know, and you could see that food insecurity in this community. You don't think it's a deal, it's a big deal, but yeah, it can be. And so to have a state program or something that supports more than it does right now, because right now the food and the food and milk from the state is probably only like $20,000. That's really nothing that we get. So to have it subsidized or to have it fully paid for, I think would be a wonderful idea. But you could see it during COVID. You could see the people who were really genuinely touched by getting a turkey sandwich with cheese. Did they like the salad? What was the favorite one that we did? Chicken salad. Chicken salad. I remember that. There was one. Is it chicken salad day? And people were like, yeah, it's chicken salad day. Then they call all their neighbors and the cars would come. It was just wonderful for everybody, you know. And the volunteers we had out there were excellent, and Dave's people were phenomenal. I remember during Easter, they dressed up in Easter bunny suits to hand out lunches. Who would think of such a thing? But it's such a great. It's not a community relations kind of project that we were trying to do. We were just trying to bring a little joy and happiness into people's lives that at that certain point in time really needed it a lot. So it wasn't self-serving. It was an expression of how we wanted to make people feel at the end of the day, just not give them a bag lunch. So,
Well, as nice a job as Dave has always done for us, we get accustomed to doing without a great deal, broadly speaking. And we need to be looking to do more across the educational spectrum, and to not be ashamed to ask the state and our state representatives to see if they can't be a little more accommodating to the real educational needs and the real needs of families in a community.
So
It's very easy when you were affluent not to understand the nature of wanting in your community.
at the end of the COVID years that we had, USDA did allow free meals for all students for one full year, which was a phenomenal success as far as we all saw. It's great to have free meals for every student that came through that line. There was no worries about kids charging meals, kids not having money, not eating because they were afraid to come up. They didn't want to charge. A lot of states in the country have adopted the same thing that, was it Minnesota or? So I do go to Washington, D.C. in March. I'm part of the School Nutrition Association of New Hampshire board. And I'm going down representing New Hampshire for public policy and legislation. And one of the items on our to-do list is to ask for free meals for all students again. So cross your fingers. And we try to meet with the constituents down there. And, it's one thing that we've been asking for a number of years. We have now the 1 year of success stories that we had behind us. So we can share that with the USDA and say, this is a program that was really beneficial to all these families, and we wish it back. You're welcome.
And I know that the school board over time has done a number of things to try to make meal access as simple and straightforward and as widespread as can be. Some things that I recall, but I'll ask our liaison if anything comes to mind for you for this as well, had to do with, there was a time across the country where students received alternative meals if they were not paying, and it was stigmatizing in a variety of ways. And I believe we did away with that.
Yes.
As well as things to do with how and when families are asked for money that is owed. And so there are a variety of things that we try to do that take us as close to that goal as we can get as an individual district, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I think going back to the free meal, sorry, I feel like I'm getting like this feedback. I think we also are when you go, or the federal government, USDA needs to take into consideration that there are families in our community that don't want to fill out that free and reduced lunch program because it's a sense of pride for them, right? That they have to fill this thing out and it's got their salary and they have to send it back with their student in the school in their folder, and then the folder goes to the box, and then the box goes to, right? And there are just families in the community that they don't want to ask, they need the help, but they don't want to ask for help. And the last thing that they're going to do is fill out that form, right? So if we keep the form, maybe, we can get it to the point that maybe it's automated and they can do it from their own living room. Obviously, this is probably not something that you can do, but
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
And again, this is from the Department of Education, Bureau of Nutrition. We are required to send a hard copy home to every family member, which is fine because everybody doesn't have a computer. Everybody, it gives everybody the opportunity to fill it out. If people are receiving food stamps, there's one thing called direct certification, which means that if they are on food stamps, they don't have to fill out the application. And we get a monthly update of all families that are on that. So they get free meals.
oh, that's good.
There is, since we're on the topic, it is confidential. We don't share that, bless you. We don't share that, again, there's always two that comes. So we don't share that information with anybody. In fact, if you're a student that's on a free program, a reduced program, you go up and you swipe your badge like your ID like anybody else. Not even the cashier knows. All it says is just paid, as if you had money on your account. So not even the person in the line collecting the money knows. So that's just something to get out there in the public, and I hope a few of them are listening, that this is confidential and no one is going to absolutely know what's going on as far as that's concerned.
And Matt, that's a good point. I think that the district does do a great job with, right? This isn't out for the general public and general knowledge, right? And we're not, singling out students saying you have to get in this line and, those that are paying full price, right? And that's a lot to be said, and hopefully that will help some of those families that don't want to fill out that free and reduced lunch form. Because they do need it, and I hope that stigma kind of goes away so that, they can and feel comfortable in doing that. So
Absolutely.
I agree, getting that out into the community, that what we try to do to make sure as a community that it doesn't get out there is really important.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would strengthen that a little bit, given that we do have some level of audience that watches these, to say that the mechanisms that exist to provide free and reduced food to children in the schools are important, and we want to give that to students. They deserve it. It's something that we're not trying to restrict, and I would encourage every single family who might qualify to please take advantage of that. The community does want to do its part for you and for your kids. Any other questions or thoughts? Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next up, we have the maintenance budget and Tom Tussaud. And Shane, I believe are you the lead on that one? Yep. Great. Take it away.
So we did it was myself, Michelle Mackey, and Chuck Mower were on the team for the maintenance budget. And we sat with Tom Tussaud. Thank you for your time, Tom. I had done this last year as well. If I remember correctly, these were all discussed last year, planned, and now this is just the execution. And so I'll go over some of the things. Significant items are the district-wide building repair and supply costs, which there's a few aspects of that I'll go over in a second. The next one is the energy retrofit lease costs for unit ventilators. If you remember, this was done already and discussed. It was part of reducing the CO2 levels in the classroom, which of course, lead to sleepiness and hard, tough learning conditions. I think the result has been great, and this is just continuing that goal and executing. The next item was district-wide AC split units. Unfortunately, in certain areas of these buildings, the airflow just isn't getting there. So we needed to put some split units in. Tom has picked the most needed areas. I think there's 10 split units going in right now. And, it's medical need driven right now. So I think that was a great way, that you guys put it. And yeah, they're needed. And then the last item was window replacements at Master Cole Upper Elementary. These are original windows. They are 52 years old, if I wrote that down correctly. Again, I don't, they're falling apart. There's mold. They're unfixable, so they need to be replaced. A few of the other items that we had talked about, I had made a note on a few of the large differences. For instance, the budgeted for maintenance and rubbish disposal was $72,000, and this is just giving one aspect of what Tom goes through. Expended with $37,000, and my question is, how do you cut your rubbish disposal in half? And he's like, we couldn't get anybody to pick it up. So again, along with everything else we got going on, they had to move trash around. The other maintenance items, roofs, upkeep, gym floors, these are all items that were discussed prior and, not out of, not a large change. Let's see, did some more cameras, that was the maintenance plan that we had talked about. Security is still a focus, and, there's investment there. And I think the last item were we talked about the unit ventilators. We talked about the bond for the next, that's a bond for the next 10 years. I think I touched on everything. Tom, I missed anything, or Michelle, or anybody?
The only thing I might add on those windows, there was no mold.
Oh, there was, what was it? There
It was rusty.
Rusty. I'm
Rusty.
sorry, not
Yeah.
mold, rust.
Okay.
Whatever it was, there, I remember you could see through a part of it.
Correct.
The thing. And yeah, that wouldn't be mold. Sorry,
Yeah.
misspoke there.
No problem.
Well, and I think it's important to say too, they're 52 years old,
Yeah.
right? I think that's, 52 years old is. And I think the only thing I would also add to that is that it's important for the community to know is Tom is down 18 people, right, in his department, maintenance, grounds people, custodians, and those type things. We had a lot of conversation last year when we were doing when we were talking about the maintenance budget, and we gave him the funding for another half a person, to at least help with the groundskeeping and the sports areas and those type things. And they were never able to hire anybody because people just weren't applying for the job. So that just leads to understanding what Tom and team are trying to go through when you're down that many people and you can't even get people to come in and apply for the jobs that we even have open. So they do a great job with what you have, and thank you, Tom.
I believe, correct me if I'm mistaken, that custodians and employees under your department fall under the MESA contract, which is one of the reasons why getting that passed is a huge school board priority this year, because it will affect our ability to hopefully hire the staff that we desperately need.
Mind if I just add something? Tom, always takes care of our safety and security. He was around when we first brought in the security cameras into the fold here that really have limited the vandalism and everything like that we have to virtually nothing. It was running probably around $8,000 to $10,000 a year in broken glass and whatnot, and now it's virtually nothing. However, what you don't see in his budget is an increased investment in safety and security, because we're waiting on the governor to sign the safe school grants that we were awarded. It's around $300,000. We're going to use that to replace some lock sets in the district. We already have a list of all those doors because Tom had Mike Dumay go through and make a list of every single door, checking every single thing that should be replaced. And we're going to add some more security cameras. So we were approved for that around a month ago. We're just waiting for the governor to get back for wherever the governor is now and sign this, and then have the executive council sign it off also. But it's an award that it's the federal funds coming in through the state, but it's not in his budget, but it is going to be in the works. So it's still a dedication to safety and security in our schools.
Thank you for highlighting that. Any other thoughts or questions? Yes.
I had a question. So are there any specific guidelines? I know, and it's a horrible time we're living in where the students have to practice drills of what would happen if a shooter entered the building. Are there any specific guidelines that we have to follow as to what type of locks? I know that we're adding security cameras, more, which is great, but are we doing anything above and beyond, replacing locks and things like that, other preventative measures? I know it hasn't been a problem around here, but just wondering, you just get those emails from your principal every once in a while that, we did these drills with the kids, just so they understand. So just wondering if there was a standard that we use and if there was anything additional in place that we've thought about adding.
Well, we've been reviewed by Homeland Security a year and a half ago. They went through every school building, and they have done a report, and we've kind of followed their guidelines. We've done all the required drills that need to be done. We've worked very closely with Brian Levesque and Matt Tarleton of the police department and the fire department also. We do have some security measures that we got from a grant also, from the Safe School grants. It was around $150,000 that are preventative in measure, but I'm not going to specify what they are for security reasons. And so, yes, we do. The type of locks, Tom, you can talk to that also. if you want. All set? Okay.
Just to clarify on that anticipated grant, so is it that you're anticipating 150,000 and
No, we got 150,000 a year ago. We spent that on measures. I'm anticipating $300,000. We've already been approved from the school building authority. It's sitting on the governor's desk, and it needs a signature before we get the money and before it's lit up in the grants management system so we can actually spend it.
And what's the timeline, do you think, for a deposit of those funds?
They tell me by the end of February, it'll be signed off.
And did I hear correctly that you're planning to spend that solely on locks, or are there other
Locks
items?
and security cameras.
More cameras?
More cameras.
Okay.
Yeah, because we go around, Tom does a great job of this, going around with the building principal, having them, give us input as to where they, see trouble spots or whatever. And then we just have, a general sense of where we would like more visibility within the building and on the outside of the building. I don't know how many cameras we have now, but it's going to be at least a couple hundred, I would say. Tom has that number, but I remember when we had none. So now we're really kind of robust as far as that goes. There's one right over there in the ceiling, that little black dome. There's another one right over there. And there's probably 4 or 5 in this that Tom can go on his computer, and if he wanted to watch this meeting from his desk, he could. So
if you're going to get this grant, does that offset some of the things that were
no,
put in?
no,
so
this
it
is in
doesn't?
addition.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect.
If not for that, we would have probably put it in the budget.
Okay, perfect.
Are there any items that you've chosen to postpone that would otherwise have been in this particular year's budget?
I believe there's always stuff that we're looking at, and there's a number of areas. There's always windows that we're looking at. There's redoing the gym floor in the high school. That needs to be replaced at one point. There are parking lots that really need attention as far as repaving and stuff like that. But as we formulate the budget, it's a big ship. So we always try to focus on certain items that are more needed at that time. So we have a long list of items. it depends on where we are that day, what's really important and what might jump. Sometimes items jump up the list. A good example would be a few years ago when we were talking about air quality and stuff like that, and then the unit ventilators came in. We went through COVID. That was very important for us to focus on air at that time. So that's when a lot of those unit ventilators and air quality became very important. As far as at Mastacola Elementary School with the windows that we're looking at, that was a problem that we saw coming. Unfortunately, sometimes it gets put on a SIP and the SIP will get moved around a little bit. And sometimes we need to refocus the SIP, and that's what we do. I mean, it's every year, it's an evaluation process, which needs to come in front. So there are definitely items, I can't tell you all of the items, but there are many.
Go ahead.
There was talk at the beginning of the year about the need for a new sign in the football arena. So I was just wondering what information you thought we might need to know from your perspective, as I'm sure that's got to be coordinated with you on some level, and just kind of get your feedback.
Oh, you go ahead, Tom.
Let me start with this. It's funny, like I said, everything's timely. So two and a half weeks ago, and Matt's been working on this for a while, and 2.5 weeks ago, I walked into Matt's office, and I said, Matt, I see where it's going, and I know we have to do something. So at that point, I said, Matt, this has got to move forward. And then Matt kind of took over at this point. I'm going to let him bring you up to where we are.
Well, Tom came in with this famous little piece of paper in his hand. The smaller the piece of paper, the bigger dollar amount on that. I've kind of learned that over the years. But we were dealing with Sean Powers of Integra Systems. He's a wonderful gentleman. He's raising money for this digital signage for us. But in the interim, we have to do something for the sign that we currently have because it's marginally functioning only by virtue of somebody having some old parts in the back of their truck to replace it. So it needs to be replaced. So last night at the school board meeting, we brought up the possibility of replacing that sign at the football field. And we want to do the other one at MES over here in the field too. That's not as expensive. So I asked the school board if they would allow me to spend $45,000 to replace that sign from the accumulated surplus that we had, which is totally legal, as long as we do it in a meeting and the board votes in the affirmative. I have that documentation from my auditors. So from that $500,000 that we had retained in surplus, we're spending $45,000 of that to replace the sign. In fact, after the board voted yes, I got on my cell phone, I sent a couple of emails, and boom, we've got a sign on order this morning. So through the hard work of Tom and Adam French, our new AD, we're going to have a new sign at that location. And the good part of it is it's going to be able to be utilized once the larger sign comes in, the video portion. So it's not, this is a stopgap measure. This is going to be incorporated into the total picture. So for the interim, we're going to have it installed exactly where it is. It's not the optimal position, but when the money comes in, as far as donated funds or any more funds we want to put in from the general fund, we're going to move it down the football field so it won't interfere with the sun. And we're going to incorporate the electronic sign that Mr. Powers is working on right now.
Thanks for clarifying
Yeah.
that, because that was my question, to make sure that would incorporate with what their plan was.
Oh, yeah,
But I know
yeah.
you're smart, so I figured it
Oh,
had to
I'm
be in
not
there
that
somewhere.
smart. I've just been
Yeah.
here for a while. So yeah, we have to make sure it all plays together nicely.
Yes.
So you mentioned, I think this goes back to you, Matt, I'm sorry. You mentioned that it takes a vote of the board, I believe.
Yep.
What takes a public hearing versus a vote of the board in terms of expenditures of that type?
Well, if a public hearing, no, for spending the retained surplus, you just need it at a board meeting, you need to take a vote. You don't need a public hearing. If you get well over $20,000 in a cash donation, then you need a public hearing. That's the RSA. It's 198:20B for those who want to look it up, but that's about it.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions or thoughts? Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
We should clap for you too, Tom.
It's my turn.
Yeah, no, it's your turn. Aren't you excited?
It's actually my turn.
Yes,
your-
but first I have
your
to
turn.
announce. Wait a minute. Okay, next up is district-wide budget presentation. And Ellen, you were the lead for that liaison committee.
I was really just the snack person, but so the committee was myself, Naomi, and Shane, but Shane unfortunately couldn't make it. Mackenzie did make it, so she was there with us as well. So it was Mr. Olson, Mr. Chevenel, and the beautiful Amy. We met here in the cafeteria, and Matt gave us this little cheat sheet, which he's going to go through with everyone. There are places in the district-wide budget that are, of course, contractual obligations, so we can't even touch those. You're going to notice some big zeros to big numbers, and they will explain those, and those all make sense as well. As a district as a whole, they're working towards improved academic standards, which a lot of people feel have been neglected over the years. They also have not had a good relationship with the board, and they feel that that's moving into a better relationship and into better light, and it's allowing them to adjust the budget and move towards servicing our students better, as well as servicing the teachers and providing them with the skills in order to service the students better and meet better academic improved standards and graduation rates, and educate our society and our community the way that it should be with our young adults, our children growing into young adults and then into adults and becoming active citizens for us. So as Matt goes through everything, I just want to give you one thing to think about and Naomi actually did a really good job. See all those little tabs? That's why I bring the snacks and she brings the tabs. So we did ask for clarification of a few things that I believe Matt's going to touch on, so I'm going to skip those for now. But adequacy in education is not best. It may have been accepted over the years, and it may even be a pseudo standard, but it's not something that we should accept as a community. We should always strive to improve our students and our teachers because they are our future. It's your turn.
Oh, I have to introduce, this is Ms. Amy Doyle, our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction and Assessment. Tom was here for like 30 plus years. I've been here for 20 years. Dave Zicky's been here since the dawn of time. And Amy, how long have you been here?
This is my second year.
Second year. So
But it's like I've been here forever, Matt. Let's be.
But she
That's
came
right.
back
She-
for a second year.
Yeah, she came back for a second year. We actually forced her to do that. So she didn't have a choice because she was doing such a great job. We didn't want to let her go. Part of it, I should have, I should have brought copies of this, and I will email this sheet that we're going to go through to Naomi so she can circulate it to everybody. But there are some items that you see in the district budget that went from 0 to 80,000, went from 0 to 75,000, went from 0 to 100,000. One of them I'll talk about that went from 0 to 100,000 is a line called school board contingency. You remember we're bringing that one back, school board contingency. So that's going to be $100,000, and that's going to be for the purpose of if we have any unanticipated blips in enrollment, kind of like we did this year. At Reeds Ferry Elementary School, we had a kindergarten class of like 119 kids, and it's like we've never had one over like 85, and it was totally took us by surprise. And so we had to add another teacher in that already. So to guard against, given the amount of construction going on here and the workforce housing and the apartments that are going up, one day you drive by, you see a field, next day you drive by, you see 400 apartments. It's incredible how fast these things
Can
go
I
up.
just add something real quick,
Yes.
Matt, since they don't have the cheat sheet? So what he's talking about right now is on page 2, and it is
Thank you.
account number 100.2310.00.8430.00.
Yeah.
It's at the bottom of the page 2.
Yeah. So having said that, there are some curriculum line items that if you wouldn't mind going through those.
So also on page, let's see, on his cheat sheet, it's 2, but in your book, it is going to be on page 5. So about
you, Amy.
halfway down the page, it's account 100.2212.00.8242.00, and the former math teacher in me is trying to make that a decimal, and I'm trying to read it to the millionth position, but I won't. Okay. So these are two new lines that after talking with Matt after my first year, I didn't, just to be really transparent, I didn't have any money to be able to really do anything. I didn't have any funding to be able to bring in professional development or to purchase pilot materials or to take a closer look at some of the curriculum development or assessment tools. There was absolutely pockets of money that Matt would say, yes, we can pull from this line or we can pull from this line. But we had talked about just trying to put something in the budget so that the budget committee, the school board, the community would be able to track that line to see what we're doing. I mean, right now, what it would be is me knocking on Matt's door and saying, Matt, I'd like to bring in some people from Wilson to do some intensive training with our Title I tutors who are going to be doing foundations and interventions. Do we have any money for that? And he would say, let me look and get back to you. But in the spirit of being able to do the work, in an expedited way, it makes sense to have some allocation to this position. And so we've worked out that we would have two lines, one for curriculum, instruction and assessment, materials and tools, and then that second line right below that is district-wide professional development. One of the questions that came up in our liaison meeting from Ellen, I believe, or Naomi, was that professional development seems to be in various lines throughout the budget. And it's just important to note that the majority of those lines are contracted. They're through a collective bargaining agreement. And so we can get into those lines later, and Matt can talk about those. But if they are in a collective bargaining agreement, we don't have any oversight over those to say we are going to use the money for this. Of course, again, pockets of money that we can take, but the majority of that money, and that is at the top of page 5, administrative improvement, that is in the advise and confer contract. So that's the professional development for administrators. Again, that's not something that we have oversight over. Program professional development staff, that second section, that's also in the contract, that $51,000. And then I believe there's some additional workshops, graduate studies on page 6, again, also in the contract. And then at the bottom, it says district initiatives 3.2, that lets you know where it is in the collective bargaining agreement. And again, that's through the contract. And so what we were trying to do was to be able to capture some funding to be able to do district-wide professional development that would be at the purview of the central office.
So does everyone understand that page 5, the first 2 sections are contract, the next 2 sections are not contract, and then page 6, the entire page is contract.
That's
So
right.
contract can't be touched.
And we're doing really, just to let you know, we're doing really good work in those areas. We do have a school board representation to the budget committee, to the professional development committee, and we talk a lot about what are the activities that teachers and support staff are doing. But those are really self-directed through their individual professional development plans and to obtain their recertification or licensure.
I was going to add to that, make sure that I'm right in what I'm saying on the clarity of it, but it's a line that I would expect that there will the amount may shift depending on what your needs are, but it should stay because the need to pilot small things, try for pieces, continue to improve and have a budget to do so, I think would be central to any district's curriculum.
And in this first year, and I had mentioned this in the liaison meeting, we talked about how much should they be. We won't know until this time next year. So if you see those numbers being higher or lower, I'll be at the table to explain why that happened.
And one thing that Matt and Amy brought out is that the Commissioner of Education is really starting to be super demanding about where every dollar is allocated to in districts. So Matt has always cared, but now he cares even more. So they always are having to prove themselves. And then I think it would be beneficial if on page 2, the stipends and mentors above the school board contingency, if you explain why that is, because the world changes, education changes, And we need to make sure that our teachers are educated and they continue to grow with our students so that we can also grow students. But Amy can explain this really well as well.
Yes, so the second line, which ends in 811200, instructional implementation of mentor training. We have a terrific mentoring training here in Merrimack. It's really a model program in anywhere you go. It's called the Torchbearers. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but essentially when a new teacher joins our school community, they're assigned a mentor, preferably in their building on their grade level, or a role-alike mentor. So if you are a special education teacher at Thornton's Ferry, you're assigned a special education teacher at Thornton's Ferry. And that person helps you learn the ropes about what it's like to be in Merrimack, but can also serve as a sounding board for you to come to and ask about, I'm heading into a meeting, what do you think about this? For classroom teachers, it's really helping them to become familiar with the programs that we use, the master schedule, the community, families. It can be any number of situations. And mentors are really a confidential relationship that new teachers have. In the past, the torchbearer facilitators have been paid for out of a different bucket of money that will not be in your book. We get grant funding, as Matt was talking about earlier, and one of our allocations is Title II. And Title II is directly related to professional development of staff, and mentoring is one of those pieces. So the facilitators, so one per building, they receive a stipend out of our Title II funds. Now, year to year, your Title II allocation will change, but that has stayed roughly between around $1,200. Now, the mentors themselves, the people that are paired up with a new teacher, their stipend is coming from a different line, and it was one of the lines that we already talked about on page 5, the 100, it's at the bottom of the page, district initiatives. And there is something, and Matt's gonna help me with this, the service learning projects, the SLP, which is something that the former superintendent it's a program that she put into place to support teacher projects. And the mentors are paid out of that. And that is, it varies depending on the year, depending on the number of projects, depending on how many people get approved for a project. But when you look historically, a mentor who does a tremendous amount of work, I just can't stress that enough. Being a mentor to a brand new teacher is a huge amount of work. And then being a mentor to even an experienced teacher coming in, still a lot of work. But they would get anywhere from $650 to $1,000. And from year to year, that number will vary. And it's really created some inequities because people are saying things like that are reasonable. I got a $900 for this same thing I did last year, and now I'm only getting $650. And so what we're trying to do again is to be able to pay mentors a fair stipend for the amount of work that they do. And the requirement is that they meet at least monthly with the facilitator and the mentors and the mentees at every building. They meet at least quarterly across the whole district. They meet before the school year starts. They have a couple of days where they come in over the summer, and that's paid for out of that line above the $80,000 on page 3. On page 3? No. Page 2. The implementation, that's $6,930 that is proposed. That's to pay everyone to come in during those days, so not a stipend, just to pay them to be here. And it's also to pay for a different type of mentor that we haven't paid anything to. So I want to shift gears a little bit if you don't have any questions about the torchbearers, because we have another set of mentors. Yes.
So just so you guys have a number in your head, because I know you're numbers people, there's about 10 mentors per building. So there's about 60 mentors in the district.
That's right. And it's hard to anticipate how many you will have. It's really dependent on the number of new hires that we have. So if we have attrition or if we have new positions, they all get a mentor.
So if you break that down, it's not that much.
Yep. And we're also hoping to pay the facilitators out of that line. If there is money, and if there's not, we would continue to do that out of Title II. Okay, to move on to the second type of mentor?
Yes.
So over the last couple of years, nationwide, there's a teacher shortage. So we have entered into a process by which a person can pursue licensure through an alternative pathway. So if you go onto the New Hampshire DOE site, you can go through, they have a lot of resources about what's called a site-based learning plan. And what happens there is a person who's interested in teaching would apply for a statement of eligibility, and someone at the state would review their transcript. They have to have a bachelor's degree and determine if they have the required number of courses to be issued this statement of eligibility. And that can be in whatever critical shortage area the DOE has determined. So for those of you here, a lot of those licensure areas are special education, science, so physical science, chemistry, physics goes on and off that list, middle school mathematics, upper level math, so positions that are very hard to fill. Once a person secures a statement of eligibility, they can come to a district, and we have to draft what's called a site-based learning plan. And professionals have 3 years to finish those requirements. The DOE calls them competencies. We are required to have a site-based mentor. So it's someone that has that same license in this district. And to this point, we have not been paying those mentors at all. They're doing that completely voluntarily. And the trouble with that is, simply people are saying, no, I'm not interested in doing that. It's a tremendous amount of work. And keep in mind, these are people that did not go to school to be a teacher. So it's not the same as being a torchbearer mentor who people that graduated, they have a license, they're coming on board. These are people that are going to work closely with those folks to help them meet the competencies. It could mean just waiting the time to take the praxis, but it could also be several pages of competencies. So if you have, say, a K-12 license in general special ed, there's about 30 to 40 competencies across those grade levels, plus you have to do all the professional education competencies. It's a ton of work. And so that line also looks to pay those mentors for their time. I probably gave you too much information.
Oh, no,
but-
we love that.
Okay, right.
I just want to start by saying thank you. I know you do a ton of work, and I'm sorry I missed the meeting because I did want to be there. This is my favorite part. I know the school board's goal this year is to help retain teachers, improve pay, and I think that getting paid a ton of money at a job is great, but if you have a ton of stress with that pay, it does drag it down a little bit. I think it's huge what you're doing, not only for, you're implementing iReady and, a bunch of curriculum type stuff. And, teachers need help with that, which is what you're doing. You're providing them training to help make their job easier and smoother and help the students at the end of the day. And, I'd argue that these lines, I think, should be, as you continue to ramp up your goals, I think they should increase. And I think this is an area that's really overlooked. And, we talk about $175,000. We're working on pay increases that are significantly larger than that. And I think that between the two of them, it's a good balance to retain teachers. Not only that, but the SAU or the teachers, whatever we're calling it, student SAU. I think this is huge, and I think it's something that's overlooked. So I just wanted to thank you, and I'm really glad that you're focused on it.
Thank you.
Something else that's overlooked is the relationship with administration and the district staff and the school board. And I think that's finally moving in a positive direction over the last couple of years where it was stagnant for many years. So thank you.
I wanted to say, because Shane mentioned one of our goals about improving retaining teachers, and that's actually I forget how we worded it. I have it listed here as an action item. It was a strategic something underneath a larger goal, and the exact wording of the larger goal was create an engaged, inclusive, and collaborative district culture built on mutual trust and respect. And there were a number of other strategic objectives. That's what it was called, strategic objectives underneath that goal as well. So the board and administration have been working very, very closely together the last 2 years when we've had these goal-setting meetings in June where all of us have had equal seats at the table. It's been very much been a collaboration between administration and the board in setting forth these goals, and these goals have informed everything we've done and everything administration has done for the past 2 years.
And it's not just the superintendent's office, right? Are you guys now going into the schools and taking their administration for goal setting as well? I kind of missed that part because my kids distracted me when I was listening to the meeting, but
That's the administration is doing that,
yes.
and they're bringing those perspectives with them
And
to
they're
our larger
receiving
meeting.
really good
Yes.
feedback from that because someone's finally listening to them.
Yes.
And I would just add, during those goal-setting meetings, and I know Naomi and Lori are both here, it's almost like feeling synergy. We were on the same page about a lot of these strategic goals last year and this year, what we were going to keep, what we were going to continue to work on, celebrating the things that have gone well, but also realizing there's a lot of work to do. So we've really appreciated the partnership with the board as well as with the budget committee.
Communication is always good.
I just wanted to specifically ask which line item would be the funds related to professional development specifically for the new curriculum items.
Okay, so you will find that on page 5, all the way at the bottom, ending in 8243.
Okay, and so that's one of the line items that went from 0 to
It didn't
100.
exist before.
Okay, so in the past, how was professional development funded?
Let's see.
That's a good answer.
It was either grant funded here and there, and then the person in Amy's position coming to me to see if we can, how do the electric lines look, or are we saving money on any other areas? So it was kind of like, I've used this term before, cobbling together other sections of the budget that we know are going to show a surplus, and then porting that money over to support what it needs to be done on an educational basis in central office. This is the first time that the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, thank you, has had a true in the general fund operating budget to work with, aside from the contractual items you see that are in the collective bargaining agreements for the teachers and for support staff, and grant funds. So this is something different, but this is something that's, from my standpoint, long overdue. So we were just kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul to get it done. And it wasn't necessarily fully funded in the manner in which it needed to be
And if
quite
it
honest
wasn't
with you.
funded, it didn't get done.
Correct.
So then a follow-up to that, this 100,000, I presume, covers a lot of the PD related to the new curriculum. However, is there a portion of that that is reserved for teachers who are not implementing a new curriculum and potentially would want some sort of professional development within their own space?
Yeah, so there are a lot of lines for teacher requested PD, and we had talked about some of them. So if you look on above the 2 lines on page 5, so the program for professional staff, teachers can make a request, say they want to go to a workshop that's of interest to them. They can make a request through the PD committee, and they can attend that workshop or that take a course, attend something, a webinar, whether it's online. They can also request to be part of either a state or national organization that offers professional development, and it can be paid for through those lines. And that would be on page 5. And then on page 6, the workshops at the very top, workshops in undergraduate, and then graduate studies.
But all of those are contracted and so presumably existed in the past?
Oh, they have been in the contract, and teachers, whether they are a part of the MTA or not, they still have access to those negotiated funds. They're not just for people that are in the union.
So going back to what Matt was saying before, I got the impression that there wasn't really anything for PD funds and you were sort of just finding money in the budget. But this sounds like there is actually contracted funds for that purpose.
So those funds are for teacher requested PD. what I'm requesting is funds for district-wide, so professional development that I would set up and offer to teachers. So for example, just as an example, if Wit and Wisdom, if the budget passes and we move forward with Wit and Wisdom, the professional development to train 4 schools, all of those teachers that would be using Wit and Wisdom will be between $22,000 and $28,000. They come on site, they do 3 full PD days, they meet with PLCs, so we have our own, point person to be able to provide that professional development. Just an example. To bring a responsive classroom 4-day workshop here, we did that last summer. I paid for that. I didn't personally, but it was paid for through Title II. And that was about $25,000 for the facilitator and then an additional fund to pay the teachers that attended. So $100,000 may seem like a lot, but it goes very quickly given the size of our district and the number of teachers. Often it's really building based. So if you want to bring PD and it's 5 buildings, you need 5 facilitators.
So if you look at it like this, a larger company, whether it's Fidelity or Elliott Hospital or something, they give each employee this much for their continued education, but then they have in-house continued education that they provide. So this is for our in-house versus what teachers have to seek on their own. Does that make sense?
That totally makes sense. I get it. You've answered my question. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
And on page 4, just before that, support staff is taken care of in a contractual way. And that includes the paras, custodial staff, food service, etc. But paras would be able to be included in the district-wide and also bring them up to speed with everything they need to do to support the teachers.
Okay, so then one more follow-up question, if I may.
Sure.
Particularly around the science of reading and the implementation of the new programs, beyond just the curriculum itself for Wit and Wisdom. Are you planning to bring in any experts that are in the science of reading space to either help educate or, help advocate for or get staff on board with that? Or is your general feeling now that the teachers in the district are very much already on board or have the foundations that they need to be able to teach the new programs?
That's a really good question. Thank you for asking it. Right now, we actually have professional development ongoing in the district from Wilson-trained professional development providers. So Wilson is the producer of Foundations, which is our phonics program. And then we also have a relationship right now with Great Minds, and Great Minds produces geodes, which are decodable readers that follow the scope and sequence of Foundations. And they're also the publisher of Wit and Wisdom. So we already have established relationships with them. Our Foundations facilitator was on site at MES, I think, last week, and they come in, they do a walk around with Holly, who's our literacy coordinator there. I don't know if any MES families are here, but she's the literacy coordinator there, and they do some spot checks. They look at lessons that are happening with Foundations and offer feedback. So we are already doing that, and I paid for that out of our Title II allocation. So we have, those folks are visiting. Some of you may know that Thornton's Ferry was awarded the Bridging the Gap in the 603 Science of Reading grant from the DOE, and they have had a ton of professional development on Acadience, which is a progress monitoring tool. It's also known as Dibbles, for those of you that are familiar with that tool. It's just been bought by someone else and rebranded, if we're being honest. And so that they're also getting a tremendous amount of PD there. I do feel like we already have a lot of these relationships happening and would really like them to continue. We did offer launch training last year to every classroom teacher, kindergarten through grade 3 on Foundations, and so that PD has continued.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
One piece that you didn't mention on that, I don't know, do we have participation in the offering at the state level of the letters training as well?
Oh, we have a lot of people taking letters. So the majority of the administrators are taking letters for administrators at Thornton's Ferry, it's a requirement to be in the grant for everyone to take letters. And then we have teachers at MES and RFS, as well as MMS. You know, it's interesting for those that have that K-8 license or are just really interested in reading to go back and engage in the really basic level of phonemes and phonics and blends and digraphs and vowels and all of those different combinations. It's been a really powerful training for a lot of folks.
And for those not familiar with it, I believe it takes, how long does it take to complete it?
Let's see, I'm on day 3, part 2, and it is 8 modules for administrators.
Yes.
It's a ton of work. I would probably estimate about 150 hours, 200
Yeah,
hours.
thereabouts. And the teachers one, I believe they take about a year to complete, stretched over time.
Yep,
And
you get
it's
a year.
essentially science of reading training that's being offered from the state level. Yeah.
But it is a good question. You know, I will say that I feel so lucky to be in my position this time, this place, because I think when I got here, there was a lot of momentum building around the science of reading. And as I've already mentioned, a very supportive school board to allow us to make such a big purchase of foundations, you know, late in that school year. There was a lot of momentum already building around it. It might make sense for us at some point to have a leader come in. But what we've tried to do is be really intentional about foundations first. Here's why we're doing it, you know, having the Wilson-trained people come in. Next step is hopefully Wit and Wisdom, having those folks come in. There have been some other speakers, so Nashua recently has had some pretty big names in the science of reading come. Our folks have been invited. I know of some people that have attended. And so, it might make sense for us in a couple of years to have a guest speaker or something offered, especially to parents. We do have several community members that are very involved in the new dyslexia screening law, the new dyslexia handbook that just came out from the Department of Education. So there's a lot of that knowledge here in Merrimack.
Yeah, I've been following it for the last couple of years, probably around the same time that the groundswell started locally. What I understand about, it's not a program. It's not a science of reading program, and you just roll it out A to Z. You can see that she mentioned multiple foundational pieces of education between letters and diables and Acadians and all that stuff. The feedback that I've seen, kind of, you know, following some of the circles, is that there isn't an A to Z for teachers on how to roll it out or how to best acclimate to it, transition to it. So that's why I was wondering if you kind of were thinking of bringing somebody in at that level to really help put the pieces together.
Yeah, and I think it really depends on your community, right? And I think you've mentioned, you know, that there are different parts. And I think one of the other nights that I was here, I mentioned Scarborough's rope. So you're talking about, you know, really the word level. So that's your phonics. Are you able to recognize words in context, break them down, sound them out? You know, and it is, again and again, the science of reading is really about the systematic, explicit instruction of skills. That's really, it's not about a queuing system or having kids guess or this shape of this word. This is what I think it might be. It starts with an E, so it could be elephant, you know. And I think for a long time, I was a special ed teacher before as well, and we've always been able to target instruction, so that's what we're looking to do. And then the other part of that rope is the knowledge building part. So how do you expose kids to vocabulary? How do you expose them to longer sentence structures or more complex passages, and help them also build confidence? So at the same time, you're looking at things like reading fluency. Can a student read a passage and make sense of it and check their comprehension as they read? So again, it's really specific instruction around those things. So it's hard to find a person that does everything well. And so one of the reasons that we went with this approach of foundations and Wit and Wisdom, because there are a lot of programs out there, I'm sure if you just Google, we've really tried to follow the Knowledge Matter campaign, which really digs into the science of reading, and the Dyslexia Association of America. And they've recommended about 7 or 8 programs. Wit and Wisdom is one of them. But we really wanted the best phonics program, and we wanted the best knowledge building. And so some programs are really good at one piece, not so good at the other piece. So we really feel like Wit and Wisdom is a good match for us here.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Chuck.
Could you please give us a locus on full competency assessment? Where are we?
At the high school specifically? Okay, so since the beginning of the school year, we have had the New Hampshire Learning Initiative meeting with our high school teachers and our middle school teachers on all of the full PD days. So they have done 3 full PD days. And then during the new X block at the high school, which is 90 minutes on a Thursday, either Brian Stack or Ellen White comes and meets with each department once a month. And they are working to develop the competencies. We do have a draft. Some departments I think are in a little bit different places than others. And our goal is to have, something to share by the end of this school year. And then over the summer, I'm hoping that Brian can either over the summer or over the course of the next school year, that we can look to align the K-12 competencies. And so looking at what the high school has put together in almost like a backward design. And so if one of our competencies in English is being able to research, what does that look like at the high school level, at the middle school level, at the upper elementary and the lower elementary? Many families are familiar with the standards-based report card, and so I don't think it'll be, just talking pretty frankly, I don't know that it'll be a big lift at the lower elementary K or even K to 6 because they're already pretty standards-based and standards-oriented. So it's really just about that next level of competencies. The middle school has been involved in some of those conversations, but their schedule is just very different than the high school. They're not all available on Thursday from 10:10 to 11:24. They're just not. So they have attended, but then we have given them time with Brian on their own. And at the middle school, he has been working primarily around the first step of PLCs, professional learning communities, and then using that as the vehicle to look at competencies at the middle school.
I brought my cheat sheet tonight. I just wanted to mention that school board goal number 2 that came out of our planning meeting last June that we collaborated with administration on was entitled The Pathways to Graduation. The summary was create multiple pathways to graduation that include robust course offerings, responsive programming and intervention, and engaging learning experience for all students. This goal seeks to address the learning and curriculum gaps that exist in the course offerings and programs that lead to the successful completion of high school requirements. And one of our strategic objectives was, I quote, true competency-based grading.
Have there been any discussions underway regarding block scheduling that would help affect some of that?
I would say that the high school right now, they have a modified block on, so they meet with all classes Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, and then they have a block on Wednesday and Thursday. I think what you've referred to in the past, Chuck, is the 4x4 block, and that is not something that we're looking at.
At the moment?
It has not come up.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Nobody's going to comment on page 9?
I know. It's page 9.
MMS bond.
Your bond payoff.
Well,
Time for a new
I
one.
was kind of getting there, but things are going really well, so I figured, should have had cake, right? Thank you. But yeah,
With a
there are
candle.
some stresses on this budget, and there's some good news on this budget. One of the stresses we have is, we carry all the fringe benefits for everybody in the entire district. So one of the big things that's a big driver, it's a $965,000 increase, is our health insurance. It's based upon a guaranteed maximum rate increase of 15.9% this year. In April, after the vote, we usually get what the actual GMR is going to be. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's exactly what the guaranteed maximum rate increase is. I don't know what page that is on your budget, but
I'm looking for it.
okay, thank you. So that is something that, that's a pretty hefty increase. It's not the largest increase I've seen over the years.
It's
You know,
the first item on page
Page-
3.
Page 3, yeah. You can see that. So that's 15.9% increase. The year prior was an 8% increase. The year prior to that was a minus 2.3% decrease. The year prior to that was a 5.2% increase. Then there was a 6% increase in the year prior to that. So it's like a 5-year history of what we've been dealing with. With the amount of employees we have on the plan, which is around 521, where plus the retirees, which is another, it brings us up to around 780 employees. We're around 80% credible as far as our rating goes, but we do spread the risk out over the entire pool of the state of New Hampshire. It's through the Health Insurance Trust. We've been with them for a very long time. It's a good organization. They get the best rates that they can for us, and they spread the risk out amongst all the towns and the cities that are involved, in the school districts that are involved in the program. It's been around for a very long time, and it is quite honestly very well run, especially in this era of the volatile health insurance costs that we're all dealing with. The COVID factor kind of hit where people put off, they deferred surgery, they deferred a lot, and then that created a spike in the following year. And now we're kind of playing catch up with that right now. The one main driver that increased the health insurance rate is the cost of prescription medication. That's always something that seems to be raising its head every single year, prescription medication. Hopefully that'll take a downturn, and hopefully the 15.9 will turn out to be something like an 8.0 or something like that, but we don't know yet. So we have to budget for the worst case scenario. But on the other hand, on the good news of things is in the district budget is we did retire the middle school bond finally. The new middle school, 20 years old, right? Yay, $793,000. So that comes off the books. So I can't believe, it's just like, I felt like the other day that I'm out there in a site full of trees and whatever, and it was all wooded and there wasn't even a road up there. And 20-something years later, it's paid off. So, and it's a great building. It's a great location. I think the board at the time made an excellent choice with making sure when they built that facility to put in central air conditioning, because when you're constructing a building from scratch, you can put in amenities like central air conditioning, which are really kind of critical when you think about it, because that facility is used basically all year round. When you're building the building as opposed to doing a retrofit like what we're doing with the split systems at the schools. Because the schools currently, they don't have enough room for ductwork in the ceiling. You got your steel bar joists, you've got a corrugated metal deck, you got a cement topping to it, and then you've got only a little bit of room in there. So that's why we have to do the splits. We can't create a system to put in central air conditioning in an entire school, especially when you're dealing with, something like J. Muse that was first built in 1948, probably had an addition in 1953, an addition in 1957, an addition in probably 6 or 7 additions to the upper elementary school. Chuck probably remembers that used to be the high school, the part facing the police station. That was the original, probably built in 1948 or something like that. You were barely just a young lad at that time, Mr. Mueller. I went to 5th grade in the first edition of that building. Excellent. So, Merrimack is the story of additions, and even this facility. Back in the 70s, this was not here. The old entrance was back where the guidance office is on the second deck. That's where the main entrance was. So it's kind of interesting when you think about it and the challenges that you have to deal with it, which is one of the reasons why we have to put the unit ventilators in, Because when these buildings are first built, people weren't thinking of air-to-air exchange, right? That
Because
wasn't
they
a
were still
thing.
smoking cigarettes. in
They're
the
still
hallway.
smoking cigarettes, right?
Yep.
Sitting at their desk, smoking cigarettes. And in the teacher's lounge, And so we had to put in, because all we had was exhaust only. Exhaust only doesn't refresh the air, so hence the need for unit ventilators in that kind of area. But middle school doesn't have that problem. So that's a couple of things just to kind of round out discussion. Middle school bond retired, health insurance rate up, but we're hoping for the best when we get the actual rates in the spring. If we get them before deliberative session, which sometimes we get lucky, we have done adjustments, but I'm not sure if it's going to happen at this point in time.
And I would like to emphasize, partly for fun and partly to give credit where it's due, Matt, you mentioned the school board contingency, and Mr. Mower, I seem to recall you suggesting that and bringing it forward last year. And we're very glad to see it joining the budget in a permanent fashion.
And if Matt gets the superintendent's office, he said he'd stay till that bond was paid off too. I'm pretty sure I heard him say that. Yeah, totally.
We'll see about that. I may just do that.
I know.
Never know.
We're gonna have to like petrify you to a chair.
Sometimes the way
Bronze you.
with my back issues and whatnot, Mr. Moa can relate, sometimes I feel like I'm petrified already, so. That's true. Oh, yeah.
Make sure you put into that budget to build that like massage chairs.
Sounds like a good
You
idea.
gotta keep the staff happy.
Yes.
Yes.
Right next to Jen's hot tub. She's the district treasurer too, so have to keep her happy.
So you mentioned in terms of the health insurance program
Yeah.
that you are part of sounds like a statewide.
Yes, the New
group.
Hampshire Health Insurance Trust.
Uh-huh.
They buy Blue Cross Blue Shield Anthem. So we have 3 different plans. We have the site of service, which is kind of a higher deductible plan. We have the Blue Choice plan, and then we have the HMO. So the contributions that we make are based upon the HMO right now. So it's 85-15, pretty much for everybody currently right now, and that's the way the plan is split right now.
And have you shopped around with other brokers that maybe have captive plans that give you that same, risk? The same
Risk pool, the
risk
risk
pool,
averse,
yeah, that's
the
what I'm
risk
thinking of.
pool.
Outside of this district plan?
We did that a number of years ago. I certainly remember that quite well. And we have to really kind of, in order to initiate that, there's some language in the teacher's contract because, all public service employees like teachers who are making probably, with a master's fresh out of college, maybe they're making $48,000 a year. So health insurance and benefits is really important to them, especially if they have a family. And so for something like that, we would have to convene a committee of the support staff, of the teachers and administration to sit down and look at different options. We did that, I don't know how many years ago. It didn't seem like it was feasible at the time. We went with another broker and another company, which was Cigna at the time, and it didn't really compare up well to what we were doing now. But that's something we'll revisit from time to time. We even revisited going in together with the town of Merrimack. That was a few years ago. I think Paul, the town manager, probably remembers that. And it didn't really benefit us at all. So, but every once in a while, we'll go out there and take a look at it and bring it up. So yeah, it's a good thing to do.
But it hasn't been done for, it sounds like.
It's probably a
few
good 10
years.
years that we haven't done it. Yeah, correct.
I used to be in the insurance industry, and so I have a little bit of an understanding of those types of plans. So I was wondering if you might find some savings there, or at least a lower cap on that.
Yeah,
percent
we might.
increase.
It'd be something to look at in the future. You have to get, obviously, you got to get 3 years of lost runs, collect those together, get a broker to get out and shop it for you.
Yeah,
and
you
see
might
what
find that your
happens.
pool if you expand your pool beyond teachers,
Yeah.
you might find people in other sectors that maybe have, different age or different risk that would outweigh, the population that
Young,
you have.
single, healthy people
Yes,
with no
those
kids.
people, yes.
Yeah. That's what we want. In
Yes.
fact, every teacher that comes through the door, you marry? Oh, no, you're single. Okay, no kids? That's right. Oh, hire them, hire them.
I also
I
work in
know we
HR
can't.
and finance for my company, so I'm always like,
Yeah,
Same
okay.
thing.
Same
But
thing.
yeah,
Any
that's what I
plans to
was
get
thinking.
married in the next 20 years? No. Okay, great. Hire
will you be
them.
going on maternity leave?
Yes.
And just for fun, because you can never tell what is and isn't picked up on that, I'm going to clarify that you were joking. Yes.
Yes, I know, because Amy was kind of giving, I could feel the heat
Yeah.
coming off her. Matt, you can't.
Melissa's dying.
You can't, yeah. Melissa's watching, our HR director at home probably, and saying, "Oh my God, he's at it again. What can we do? We'll turn off his microphone." So that was in jest.
But there is an advantage to shopping around, and so that's why
Yes, there
what I was
is.
getting at is,
Yeah.
have we looked outside of the current
Yeah.
risk pool that we've been
Yeah.
shopping in?
most school districts use Health Trust.
Most school districts use Health Trust, but it doesn't hurt because sometimes kind of gets their attention a little bit for renewals, if you know what I mean. So that could be something we could look at in the next year or two. Yeah.
Anyone else? Thoughts or questions? I think that wraps it up for this presentation. Thank you very much.
Like she needs a tiara with little books and stuff on them. I'll take the hooks. Did I pass, Lee? Did I pass?
Okay. The next item on our agenda is titled Orientation to the Work Session. It seems to me that before we wade into the numbers themselves, however we do it, and I have some thoughts on that, we should talk about it and make sure that there's an understanding of how we're going to maximize our use of the time. We have essentially one work session scheduled. We can choose to add a bit of time in certain other ways, but we are under very specific deadlines. We have a particular deadline under statute by which we have to submit our budget proposal. We are working 1 week ahead of that because there is no leeway. There is no mechanism by which I can postpone a meeting. If we were having a tornado, under statute, we would have to be here at the right time and place for our public hearing. And so scheduling to that day seems imprudent. We have that last final day as a snow date for the actual scheduled one, which is on the 13th. And so we have meetings after this. The 6th is our work session. On the 13th, we have our required public hearing, after which time we can do our final deliberations and have our vote. Does that make sense so far? Okay. So I brought a few things along because it would not be an evening without some handouts that have to do with process.
I can't wait till they're on colored paper.
We have to need a budget for this committee first. Okay. Look for the paper that has statement of purpose at the top and has some yellow highlighting on it. So it has NH Revised Statute 32-1 Statement of Purpose at the top. Now, there are two statutes on this page from separate ones. One's 32-1, the other is 32-16. These are ones that I chose to highlight in order to guide our discussion on what we're going to be doing as we proceed into the next stage of building the budget proposal. There are 2 points that are important here, and each one is highlighted in one of these statutes. The lower one, the one second on the page, is the duties and authority of the Budget Committee. And it's the one that lays out that it is our responsibility to prepare the budget, to make the choices to the amounts, to bring it to the point where we have conferred with all the governing and relevant bodies. We've conducted the public hearings, we finalize it and move it forward. And so in that very real way, we build the budget proposal It is something that we create. We are in collaboration with others, no question. I'll talk about that more in a moment. But the numbers are ours to look at, choose, talk about, and vote on in a final form. Now, that said, there is a distribution of power here. The first statute, Statement of Purpose, makes that very clear. It notes that the Budget Committee the intention is for it to have budgetary authority analogous to that of a legislative appropriations committee. Now, appropriation committees vary at different levels of government, but they do share one thing in common, and that is that appropriation committees take what policymaking bodies wish to accomplish and decide what is prudent and feasible spending in order to accomplish it. So, for example, and I will ask forgiveness in advance for anybody with military expertise on this, because I'm going to abuse a military analogy for this. If there is an appropriations committee, the Air Force requests funding for, say, 50 new planes. The appropriations committee might decide we can only afford 40. They might decide a variety of things, but what they would not do is say, you can't have planes, we're going to buy you rowboats. The request was for this particular thing, regardless, of that piece. And so one of the things to keep in mind is that what we're doing is taking the excellent work of our school board and bringing it to fruition in the best fiscally responsible way possible. Everybody at this table has other priorities, myself included, some of which we slip into conversation. We certainly talk about them plenty. But when it comes right down to it, along with our responsibility for the numbers comes the fact that if we want to make policy, we need to go to public comment for the board and or run for the board or become a part of the policy-making body. Thoughts on that distinction that I'm drawing, if it makes sense, if it doesn't? Do you want to speak to that at all? You don't have to, I'm just giving you a chance.
I later I'm going to read what the board's goals were for the year, but I was going to do it during member comment, so.
No, that works perfectly well. This is the reason, by the way, that if you look at the table that has the requests from the district for additional information, we've started maintaining one for the board as well. This is not an attempt to dictate what the board does or doesn't do. It's to make sure that things that we don't understand policy on, that otherwise we have to decide independently, there's an opportunity for the board to provide us with that background before we have to address that topic. One more chance for thoughts or talks on this page. You'd think with all these papers I could find the right one quickly, but it doesn't work that way.
So Naomi, just to clarify my
Please.
understanding of what you're saying. In the past, I've heard that the role of this committee was sort of a rubber stamp. Are you saying that we have a fiscal responsibility to look at what's been requested and to make the appropriate decisions based on what's in the best interest of both the district, its teachers and students, as well as the taxpayers?
Correct. I would alter what you said by one thing, and that is that we are to look at materials provided to us. There's also been an assumption in the past that there is a logical flow. It works well. I want it to work this way, but there's a flow by which what we're doing is evaluating the school board's budget request. In a perfect world, that is our main document that we want to look at. However, we're mandated to do this whether we have that document or not, which is why we've proceeded so far with what we have and are looking forward to when the school board gives us more, but we're not stopping in order to wait for it along the way.
So an additional question. If my family wants to spend a lot of money, because it would be really great if we had a lot of great things, it would be my fiscal responsibility as the head of household to make sure that we're not spending over our means or setting ourselves up for not being able to afford things in the future, things like that. That would essentially be our role here, to decide what's fiscally responsible and not necessarily feel obligated to approve everything that's been requested?
We can incorporate things that are requested. I wouldn't use the word approve because we're creating our own document. We can incorporate things that are requested. We can incorporate additional things, fewer things. We do what is prudent. That said, I would qualify it to say that we're striking a balance. What we're deciding isn't what the school district will have. We're deciding what the voters should be asked for. The voters ultimately can vote for it or against it and express their own ideas of prudence at that time as well. And so what we're doing is bringing into reality as much as one can the policy and vision of the board with a level of responsibility, fiscal prudence, and other things of that sort.
Okay, that's a good clarification. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Okay, onward. There are 3 pages left. One of them, if you look at the top of it, it has 3 columns. One column is yellow, and at the top it says draft request, budget request, and proposed budget. By the way, for those following along who don't have these lovely packets, for the work session, we will have a projector so that we can show some of these more easily. And I do have a link I can share to those who brought laptops to look at that in a minute here as well. But just be aware this will be shared outward when it's necessary. So I've been working on documents to help us do this thing because we are doing what budget committees have always done. We're not doing anything new, but we're doing it in some new ways and with some new clarity, which requires clarity of process to bring into being. One of the first things that we will need to do, looking at this one page, is we're going to be filling in the proposed budget column. We'll be choosing that number. Now, I would assume that we will begin with, and almost certainly in many cases, roll over and accept numbers that have been suggested to us. We're not going to do a line by line in that way. However, we do have the ability to pause on any of these sections or units and look into it more closely. I'll explain what I mean in a moment. My intention is this. At the working session, I will say, okay, district-wide, that encompasses in the budget, budgetary units 1, 0, 1, 4, and 5 in your lines. Does anybody intend to bring anything forward in relation to that unit to talk about line items? And I'll ask that. And if the answer is no, then I'll move that we adopt the numbers from the administrative request. Unless we have the school board request at that time, in which case we can use that one. But I can only speak to what we have at the moment. If somebody says, ooh, I want to talk about line X, then I'll note that. We won't add that unit yet, and we'll look to the next. We'll identify which ones are going to take our attention, and then we'll go back and talk individual lines within those. So what you're going to want to have for next time is anything that you want to talk about. You want a line number, and to know which unit it's in, so that when it comes up, you can tag it for us to discuss and make that conversation happen. The spreadsheet that this is printed from, and I'll hit send on that link for those who are interested in seeing it now. This is my own personal working document. So it will enter the public domain, but at the moment it's changing as we look at it. And so every single moment of the live document is not something that I can record even if I want to. Let me just send this. So in the spreadsheet that this is printed from, I'm attempting to minimize human error because we're going to use the beauty of Excel to tabulate for us. So the grand total at the bottom will auto-calculate from the numbers above it and that kind of a thing where it makes sense to do so. The proposed budget numbers themselves will auto-populate from the sample page that you're holding, which is where we're going to fill in the line by line. Does this basic process and how it'll play out, is what I'm saying making sense first? And then second, are there thoughts on this as a process?
I just have a quick question. Do you know when we're going to see this?
I was going to give you an update during member comment. Would you rather have it now?
Oh,
or-
please do, yes. Thank you. Mhm.
The short answer is next week. I would rather give the whole answer when I can have a whole minute to talk the way I've prepared to. So, before after our next meeting, which is Monday.
And thank you. And I'll also reserve the majority of what I have about that for when you talk about it. But when you're thinking, as we move towards it, having it in hand is not the same as having it analyzed and ready to go for our meeting. And so we're going to want to talk about that time span space in that way. Process. Thoughts? Questions? Ellen?
I just want to say that I've been pulling up the school board meetings and playing them through CarPlay. You don't have to see their faces to hear what's going on. And sometimes it's nice because you're not distracted by who's presenting or what, and you can actually pick up pieces. And then I talk into my phone and I take little notes. That's very helpful if you drive a lot like I do.
That is
But
helpful. I did not know
If
that.
you don't have time to sit down and watch it, you can just leave it playing on YouTube on your phone instead of Candy Crush.
I like that tip. Thank you. Other thoughts on this process? Okay, so hearing nothing further on that, then I'm going to roll this forward as the process that we will use. This is our first year. I assume that we will make it better year by year, but I think that it's a good starting point. Michelle?
Sorry, late entrance comment here. On some of these, especially like the district-wide one, is it easier to note which ones we can't even adjust for even so? When we talk about it next, I mean, there are some of these line items that.
So that's an excellent question, and it actually came up when I was talking with the district leadership about how to handle this, because I did talk with them to see if this process, in their experience, looked like it would fail spectacularly or have a potential to make a difference as well. And they voiced the same concern. My sense at the moment is that since we're going to first talk about units, and then about lines within specific units, if somebody brings forward one that is non-negotiable, we can just say so at the time. Yeah.
They're usually marked too with like the 3.1C where you can find it in the contract and sometimes the description. And Naomi did ask in our meeting for them in the future under the description to be more descriptive, like this is a contract item. Because page 5 is contract, but they didn't reference the contract.
And I would anticipate, again, depending on how this goes in future years, on the spreadsheet that's calculating it, we can probably indicate those lines more clearly, but I can't go through it in time to do that myself this time around.
And your new school board, when you listen to them and you watch them, they're asking for more clarification and breakdown too within the budget as well versus these big grouped things. So that goes along with the Commissioner of Education, what they're asking. So what Matt and Amy didn't share when they were here is on December 22nd, before noon, they were requested to turn in certain budgetary items by, a certain time. So they had to work like through vacation in order to get it there before Christmas, before New Year's, and to make sure that our district was compliant with them. So not only is the state being more demanding, but as a community, we're being more demanding for the transparency and where every dollar goes. And it makes more sense. Again, communication is key in order to move. If, they know why they're spending a penny, they're not going to argue about it. Okay, that's it.
By the way, I'm not ignoring this side of the room. It's just my mic is tilting me away from you in this particular meeting.
No, I have better hair.
Good? Okay, this takes us to the last sheet, and in some ways the one that I hope will have conversation. I'm gratified when there's no conversation because it suggests I did a good job. But conversation is also nice, especially about certain things. This is the newest and latest. I want to qualify it in a variety of ways. The numbers that I'm going to talk about are ones that I gathered personally from the sources that are cited. I came to these conclusions of how the numbers could be used. It is far from perfect. It is to illustrate a principle that I think we might use this year moving forward. This is the one with a little statewide increase graph on the bottom of it, in the middle of that piece. So this is in relation to the fact that we are structuring a budget, we are choosing amounts of money with the guidance of the bodies that are appropriate for that. And there's been an area in terms of structuring and creating a school district budget that has not made sense to me since I've been involved. It didn't make sense when I was on the school board. It hasn't made sense here much at all to me. And that is that we give the district, as all New Hampshire does, we're not alone in this, something of an impossible task. Every year we say, go forth and tell us what you need, and then we'll figure out if you're right or not. Which isn't the way, typically budgets have some kind of vague idea of what you're shooting for, kind of maybe, so that you can compare that fiscally prudent goal to the things that you want. But we don't have that, and we've never used that. And I find that disorienting. I find it disorienting when things happen, such as at the school board last night, doing sensible work to say, let's cut. And I'm sort of, what and why? Why that number? How did we decide it? Where is it in relation to where we think the budget should be? And that's very difficult to answer. But I think we can make a stab at it. And what I'm suggesting is that we create what I'm calling a budget committee guidance number. This year, it will be the roughest estimate if we use it. Certainly in future years, we can spend time in our October, November meetings deciding how we want to calculate that. There are many possible ways to do it and many variables that we could. But what I'm going to show you is one possible rough way that uses a few numbers to demonstrate the process. I will say one more time. Please do not take this as any kind of fiscal gospel. This is my work to demonstrate a point. So I was thinking to myself, what exists at this moment in time that we can use to begin to answer the question, what is a reasonable school district budget? Once we have that, we can decide that we need more than reason because we need to renew things and bring ourselves up. We can decide we need less because the community cannot support that number. We're not locked into it because of that, but it sure would be helpful to know what reasonable is. And so I was thinking, what can we use to calculate that? The number that came to mind was to base it in certain ways off the cost per pupil at the state and local level. New Hampshire calculates the cost per pupil, and it does that for each district, and it provides a state level one as well. If you're looking at your sheet, you can see the state formula provides at the moment $20,322.52 is the state average cost per pupil. Now, you have the Merrimack one below that. Note that we are below the state average. Now, I would like to also note, when I was looking at this, it quickly became apparent that the state formula for calculating that is complicated, and they don't share it. They include certain things, they exclude other things. I know what some of them are. They kick out the transportation costs, there are other things, but it was not possible. And I did consult with Matt, and he was willing to do it, but it would have taken up his job for several days at least, and he has a job to do other than provide me with this. And so I asked him not to do that at this time. Instead, what I did was I looked at what they noted as our operating budget, and it was about 71 million for last year, and noted that it was 24.5% lower than our actual operating budget. So I said to myself, if we increase by 24.5%, we get the actual cost per pupil based on our actual operating budget. Are people following me on this so far? Great. When I did that, I adjusted it, calculating it to 100% of operating budget. It's the next two lines, the New Hampshire and the Merrimack, is what I got for that. So that the actual adjusted cost per pupil in New Hampshire as an average is approximately $25,300, and the adjusted for Merrimack is approximately $2,515, again, still below the average. Next piece that we would need is, well, it's not the same from year to year, it changes. Costs increase. There's inflation, there are various other things. Hopefully they sometimes decrease, but it doesn't happen very often. And the State Department of Education puts out a history of these increases and increases for the last 20 or so years. You can access them on their data website. I did a quick poll of the last 5. That's what you're seeing in that graph there of the statewide increase. So this is the percentage increase in costs each year that's been seen across the state. And it has varied. It has been up lately. I took 5 years and I set a trend line. And then I looked at that and said, oh, that's not going to work because 21-22 was an aberrant year, way up into the 9% as opposed to the 3 to 5%. And it skewed that trend line till it was not even useful. So I pulled that out, but I left the 9.57 there so you could see what it was and did the best fit. And from that, in my thoughts on it this morning, said, looks like about 5% is what the educational costs increase for the coming year is projected roughly to be. So moving back, I put 5% in that little yellow box. By the way, in the spreadsheet version, that is formulated, so we can change that and it'll change all the numbers for us. And we'll get to play with that next week. That's what I'm going to be projecting on the screen. If we take that at 5% and we increase our Merrimack adjusted cost per pupil, we get a number, and that number is $26,566 per head. We then take that, multiply it by the projected number of students, and we get a rough estimate of what a district of our size, what we would be getting as our budget. Do you see where I'm going with this? As I said, I didn't do cost of living, and we could do that. I didn't do all kinds of things, and I think we should have very robust conversations about how we figure that. But I did want to note what this found. With these rough numbers based off the cost per pupil, to fund Merrimack unchanged, as in the same value as opposed to the same dollar amount, because dollar amounts change based on these things, they would have to request a budget of $95 million. If we were going to fund it at average state levels, they would have to request a budget of $94,700 or so, which you'll notice both are above what they've asked us for. And I think that's interesting because it notes that regardless of gut reactions to numbers like 91 million, 1 million, and so forth, they're actually asking, even with all that they're doing, for less than real dollar level funding in that way. Now, that doesn't mean we have to give it to them. They're the realities of Merrimack and what we can afford. But I think it's worth knowing in that way. So what I'm suggesting is that whether we do it this evening or if we do it some other one, that we choose a guidance number that we're looking at and saying, this is what is reasonable that we're comparing the total to. So thoughts on this, please? Yes.
When you were doing your calculation, and I don't know how you want to consider this when you're thinking about numbers in general, but how did you account for warrant articles, things that are going to be on the ballot and will eventually be incorporated in the operating budget? So like, say there's $1 million in MESA contracts and there's $700,000 in roofs and another $700,000 in a new central office building. That's another, $2.5 million ish. Where does that fall? Have you accounted for that in your cost per pupil, or will that be something that the committee needs to consider?
I have not accounted for that. This is straight run. Yeah. Other thoughts? What do you think we should do with this kind of number? Do you think that looking at this is something to pursue? And if so, in what way?
I think it's a great check mark, a great metric to just look at overall. I like how you did it, and I think it makes a lot of just sense, just common sense. So I don't have an answer for you, but I like it.
I think I do too. It makes a lot of, it's like a good flow. But I also think at the same time, right, just to compare different things, even though you're comparing Merrimack and the state. But then I think we need to look at it in a more granular view of what was proposed last year, or what the taxpayers agreed on last year, what our proposed budget, what we're looking at right now, and what the default budget is. Because I think we need to know those numbers too, because if we go and say, okay, well, we want to add this, and it ends up being like over the 95 million, let's say, right? But our default budget is like 91 million, right? Then we also have to look at it, not necessarily in a qualitative manner, we're gonna have to look, or in a quantitative, but a qualitative, because at the end of the day, we really need to justify a $4 million swing either way. So I think those are some numbers that we need to look at as well in looking at the entire big picture.
So if you look at back to the draft request page with the yellow column, there's a space below right here. There's grand total, and under that I have the current year and total change from that current year. But we can add any other calculations that we want onto that. I can't do complex ones on my own. Some of this has to wait for next year. In terms of gathering it. But some of those, if you send me some notes of what you'd enjoy, appreciate seeing there, I can build them in.
I'm doing quick math, so these numbers are not exact. So my question, actually, before I do that, I'm going to speak to your thing. I actually asked Matt today for a really lovely document that I would be happy to share, which is 10 years of history. I have proposed budget, default budget, whether or not it was over or under the default, the proposed budget was over or under default, and how much, and whether or not it passed, which is very useful information when you're considering what has the town been asked for previously.
That would be wonderful to have if you're willing to share that.
Yes, absolutely.
I can either send it out. Would folks like it ahead of time so you can look at it ahead of the meeting and give it some thought? Yeah, okay, I can do that.
Yeah, I can forward it tonight. That's no big deal. So the other thing is you mentioned that your per pupil average, so what happens with those warrant articles is that they get voted on separately, but they will be part of the operating budget once they are passed. So if they are passed, the request is not $94,300,000-ish dollars. It comes to roughly, again, because I'm just doing round number math, $96,800,000, which is, so just food for thought.
Absolute food for thought. I would add that, yes, I agree, and that's valuable information. We need to add it on both ends. So if we're going to count those in terms of this year, we need to count them as additions on last year's as well when we're doing the calculation. So in some ways it comes out a wash, but it's still worth having it as a point for each.
It's, I feel like it's worth thinking about when you're, there's a whole discussion to be had about requests, I guess. And it's worth just noting that exists.
And I would say, because I think that there may be a piece to some of what you're saying, and by the way, Lori, if you want to join us, you're more than welcome to for this conversation. You don't need to by any stretch, but you're welcome to.
I have a few things to say.
Yeah, come on up. Let me finish what I'm going. Let me finish this bit, and then we'll bring you into the conversation.
Don't forget your microphone.
Yeah, let's let you go.
Some of the things on, when we're talking about the state average, when you look at 2011 and 2010, we were spending about $11,000 per student. And so now you have to look at what happened between those years. And one of the things that happened were COVID. And then when you also look at that number, I think it's really important to look at different school districts because, we are very, very similar to Londonderry. But if you just go to Bedford, they're paying about $17,000 per student. And so you have to say, how does Bedford pay, so much less than us? And there's lots of reasons because a lot of people come back to us and say, well, what about Bedford? Well, have you driven on the roads lately? No, I'm only kidding. But their high school's new or relatively new, so they don't have all the retirement costs. There's so many things that come into it. But if you look at, Dairyfield schools are $41,000 per student. Dairy schools about $41,000. So all of that comes together to give us that number. So I think it's a good idea to look at that number, but I don't think it can be the only number that we look at.
So I would agree and build on what you just said and say, I went with the state average to make this point of what we can do. It would be prudent, I wasn't going to do this alone, to build a cohort of districts to compare to specifically, and we could certainly do that. Again, probably not this year. We're on our short timeline, but I agree that that would be a great improvement.
Right, because I think that gives us a really good indicator on, how does a school that social economically, the town is very much like us, like Londonderry. How many administrators do they have? How many people at central office? And try to do a comparison, because I think that's a question that we all have.
And I would welcome, I won't speak for the group, but I will speak for myself and hope that the group agrees. I would welcome the school board being a part of creating some of those things to draw upon. Yeah.
And I just want to add to that's typically something we hear from the community whenever budget conversations come up. Community members want to understand, why aren't we in line with comparable districts based on population and socioeconomic status, et cetera. So I think that's a really important point that we should consider.
Right. And then just other things, I don't know if you want me to jump back to things, like I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of professional development. I know people had some really good questions, and prior to 3 years ago, the Merrimack School District just did all of their professional development in August, if you can imagine that. And so teachers would come in, they would have professional development, and then they would teach the whole year without the opportunities to get together and also have, fresh learning. So I think that Amy has done a phenomenal job for our district, providing professional development, us giving more professional development to our teachers. And in the last 2 years, if we looked at the data, we do not have teachers flooding out of our district. We were a training district. That's what was happening. We were training them, and then we were sending them on their way, which is very, it cost us just so much money for every teacher that we lose. And so that's been a really positive thing. And just a little bit about our goals meeting. So Naomi talks about it. So 2 years ago, we met in June, and then we met again. And it really gave the board a really solid focus on not only curriculum, aligning curriculum to state standards, getting a good reading program, looking at our math scores, but also what are our primary needs. And we felt this year really strongly as a board, the central office is not a want, it's a need. It's not ADA accommodated, it has mold. It's a 13-year put in the back burner problem. And now we're at the point where we really feel that it has to be a priority. And for it to be a priority, the board's priority has, we've said to administration, we really want it to be a priority. We really want to spend a lot of time letting the town know. I know that some people came and spoke to you, but we'd be willing to do that again and do our presentation. We have video, but we also have a PowerPoint presentation. Jenna is actually going to be doing it at the deliberative session with myself, just about why that is such a need. And then, let me see, there was one more thing. Oh, the free and reduced lunch. It is so important that they fill out the forms, because that's how we get aid, right? That's how we get aid, through that form. But I do think there is a place that we look at that we don't think about. So kids fill it out. But in our families, sometimes something happens and there's a gap and kids don't have lunch. And so something that I've talked about for a really long time, and I know there's people on this committee that probably would be really excited to help me with it. I really think we should work with Fidelity Corporation, they're in our town, and set up a sunshine fund. So when people pass away or want to make a donation, it goes to a school sunshine fund. So if a kid doesn't have sneakers, if we see they don't have a coat, like, it can be done all through this fund. I know that's where I would leave all the millions that I have to the sunshine fund, but it's something we could do with Fidelity. They're right here. And we just need, it's something I've talked about for a couple of years now, but I just need a few good people. And I think there are needs that we're not addressing. We probably have people that work at Fidelity.
Jennifer?
I just want to definitely echo this outside the box thinking about such a fund. I think that would be amazing, and we should absolutely pursue it. I also would love to hear, not tonight per se, but based on you talked about what the primary needs are for the district, and so what the school board has set forth for priorities is.
I have them. I'm reading them later. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Plays
interrupt.
into that primary need. And so when I think about everyone who's asked for funds and all of the increases, my thinking goes to what are the primary needs, right? Supporting, maybe it's professional development, maybe it's the new curriculum, but whatever those things are. For me, the primary needs might be different. Someone else might be like, well, we really need to pave the parking lots, or we really need this new building, or whatever the things are. And I think if we all kind of bring our thoughts about what those primary needs are to the discussion next week, it might help us to kind of weed through the numbers a little bit.
So I would put one qualifier on that. I agree, and I intend to bring priorities and talk about them. But ultimately, the priorities that we should be creating a budget for are the school board priorities.
Correct.
That's the policy-making body. We may disagree with what they feel is the appropriate amount to put to achieve a certain goal. We can certainly work with that in a variety of ways. And I will, be perfectly honest, it's not as if we have a censure process if we deviate from this, but the directive is pretty clear on that.
And they restate their priorities in almost every meeting.
And I know, like, Chuck, he brought up tonight a 4x4 block, and people go, well, how does a 4x4 block have to do with the budget? But what he's looking at is a 4x4 block in a high school would mean that students take 4 classes instead of 7 classes. And actually, because we have a critical need of educators, it's a system that works. And where Chuck in the past was a Woods teacher, when he taught, for 60 minutes, by the time he took attendance and got everything together, it's now he's teaching for 35 minutes, where if he has a 90-minute block, he can actually teach. So he's been beating that drum at the high school and at the school board meetings, and it actually is something that is a very effective schedule to work. But it's something that for us as board members, we bring our things to the administration, our thoughts, but really we stay in our own lane when it comes to curriculum and decisions. We get to weigh in, but we also give them a lot of latitude. And with the budget, we've asked them to come back and give us information on where can you live, because we are afraid with the the town of Merrimack lost $74 million in industrial and commercial. So people got tax bills of $1,800. People were really upset, like, and it always is. It's always the schools, right? This is the school's fault that this went up. And so I think it's really important that people realize that we're trying to set really high priorities this year so we can get the MESA contract passed, which we think is critical for our paraprofessionals, our kitchen, our maintenance people. Their pay at this point in time is pretty low. And so we have one more shot to try to get that contract together, and we believe we're going to. So that's a priority for us, and the central office is a priority.
And I'd want to flesh out a few things that came out. A number I came across when I was gathering these tidbits for this sheet is you want to be aware the statewide costs for education have risen by 70% over the last 10 years. This isn't a Merrimack thing. It has skyrocketed everywhere in certain ways. when we talk about this number, and I know I kind of tossed out this kind of threatening one for those who can't see the paper, I said, oh, look, 95 million is what would actually be on par. I'm not suggesting that that's what we head for. I'm suggesting that we be aware that when we talk about lower numbers than that, what that means, what we're actually choosing to decide, so that people don't look at 91 million or potentially 90 and say, well, that's still above what a district would need to function, and that they get a better sense of that as we go. So please, and I think that's partly where you were perhaps coming from on that one, yeah, please don't take this as an assumption that I'm trying to work towards that number. I would be equally interested in a conversation where somebody came to the table and said, I get this, but our community can only afford half of what we're currently. We could still have that conversation. I would disagree, but it would be a valid conversation with a comparative point.
Yeah, I have two comments, and they're totally unrelated. One, I worked for a company that sold professional development, tens of millions of dollars every year. My concern is I'm seeing vendors who are selling us product then being paid to do professional development. I would make the distinction that there's a difference between professional development and what they're doing. They have a vested interest in all of those programs being successful. And if we're paying them to fill their vested interest, I think we're doing a disservice to this community. We would provide product-related professional development at least at reduced cost and oftentimes at no cost. So I have a concern on that. My comment on these two budgets here, what I'm looking at, is they're the same. You know, the numbers, if you overlay them and watch this, one's 3.92% and the other's 5%, they're essentially the same budget, but they'll have no significant reality for anybody unless that yellow section is filled out and they still come up to what we're looking at. So I think you got something going here. But in the end, if we go over this number or under this number, we need to be ready to explain to the public here in Merrimack why we've done it, where we have done it, and how it's going to benefit them. With the budget that we have, you're going to have, and people getting the tax bills that they had, you're going to have a number of people at that deliberative session. And a number of them are going to be, let's say,
Have strong
disappointed.
perspectives.
Yes. And I think we have to be ready to address those concerns, which are real concerns.
I agree completely. And I will say, on a slightly more personal note, I have no children. I have no nieces or nephews or cousins or grandchildren. I will never get a single dollar benefit to a child in my family from this district. I support public education for other reasons. And while I certainly don't speak for everybody who funds without having children, I certainly understand the pain that can bring on that level of balancing the need and desire to do this thing for our society and for our own self-interest through it with a heck of a tax bill. So yes, we're going to need to talk long and hard about the reasons for things.
We've gone through these inflationary sheets. I think we're all on the same page that we're in an inflationary period and we've increased costs on everything across the board over the last few years. So if you spend 90 million 2 or 3 years ago and you spend 90 million this year, that's about 5% less stuff you're getting for the same 90 million. So, you know, we talk about if you spend 90, I think we need to keep that in mind as we talk about this. The number should keep going up, you know, whether we want to pay more or not. And, you know, to your point, I can see the smile. It's not the tax, our taxes aren't going up because of this budget or because of an extra couple million to cover stuff for kids, just to be clear.
I think you've done excellent work on this. And I know that we can't do any complex calculations, but I do think that Lori has a really good point about, you know, I think we need to factor in, even if we can't make a big cohort, but at least get some more information on some of the comparable towns like Londonderry or such. So we can make sure that, our baseline, based on other towns that have the same socioeconomic population size, we can make sure that these numbers make sense. And I like what you've done with the, getting the numbers, because there's a difference between what we should be paying per student versus the town's proclivity to actually want to pay for that. So, and my other concern is that because that, the budget that the state budget and the numbers that you run, they're not taking into account warrant articles either. So we may not be comparing apples to apples if we have to take into account those, because you just don't know what they're going to be. It's so specific based on, the particular town. But overall, I think this is great work.
Yeah, the tough part in building a cohort will be figuring out what the number to use for them, including or excluding their warrant articles will be. And there's work to be done in that. But if there's a desire or need for us to have a basic cohort to begin to look at this year, people can email me their ideas, and we can build it. Those numbers are easy to pull. Those numbers are easily available. Yes.
I don't know what it is with this mic tonight. Oh my Lord. I agree with what you're saying, Gina. I think we just need to be careful of that, right? Even we can compare ourselves to, we've been using Londonderry as the example all night, right? But you also need to take into account, or you have to look a little bit deeper than just the numbers. Because sometimes it comes down to number of buildings and how old are the buildings and those type things, right? We're talking about replacing 52-year-old windows and replacing stoves that have been around for 20 years and one that's been around 50 plus years, right? Where if you look at the ages of some of the buildings in the Londonderry School District, again, I'm just picking on them, and not that I know everything that's going on over there, right? But a lot of their schools are relatively newer than what we have in Merrimack. So I think we have to be, it's great to have that as a basis point, and I had actually written that as a note, like what are some of the surrounding towns doing or whatever, or what is their cost per pupil? But I think we can't take it as face value. We have to take it as a piece of something, some sort of metric to look at, but it's not an all-inclusive, because there are other things that we may have in our district that they don't. Like we could never compare ourselves to Nashville, right? Nashville's got 12 elementary schools that go into 3 middle schools, or junior highs that go into 2 high schools, right? It's a progression thing, but.
I think it could work in our favor though, because if we have the same, you are rubbing off on him. Oh, is that you?
That's why I always sit there.
And Shane, your microphone is making me really nervous. That is a tight pull right there. Oh my gosh. Because if we, use the baseline as someone who has the same socioeconomic and population, but then we can say, okay, but our cost per pupil differs because of X, Y, and Z, it actually might work in our favor, because I don't think people understand that and take those type of metrics into consideration, like what you were saying about Bedford. I lived in Bedford years ago, and they didn't have a high school. The taxes were much lower, but they didn't have high school. They were being ported out to Manchester. And, kudos to you who live in the town where you don't have any children, but I think what we don't people need to understand is having a good educational system, that's a huge part of the community, and it's what makes the community valuable. It's what drives the resale pricing. It's what attracts businesses here. So, I think it really does benefit everyone to have that great educational system, because it does attract just more than higher taxes. The reason why we have higher taxes is because people are coming because we've got a good thing. Businesses are coming and they're not leaving, which is, one of the big reasons why we got the big tax bill. But those are just some of my random
They
thoughts.
don't hesitate to vote in the new fire truck, the new ambulance, the salary there. But if we don't vote in the stuff to educate our kids, no one's going to be left to drive them and to save you.
So I have 2 things. One is sort of a rebuttal to what you said, Shane. I know that costs do keep increasing, and I don't think we'll ever see an end to that per se. But I think of the community members who are on fixed incomes, who are not, part of the middle to upper class. And Merrimack is a very split town in terms of new money and, old money, or, white collar and blue collar. And I think of the people in our community who cannot afford the ever increasing costs. So we need to have some sort of a fiscal responsibility about that, because I do think that there are folks in town who cannot afford the ever increasing costs.
I'd like to pop in and kind of do a thing on this that I think is important. I think there's a difference between recognizing that if we don't raise the amount, we are lowering what the district can provide, and choosing to lower it intentionally because the community cannot afford it. So that's the point. We might make a decision that we can't raise it to match what the increase is in cost. But if we make that choice, which is a valid choice, we have to recognize that we're telling the district to do less in order to get that. Does that?
My second point was, thinking about if we land on a number, 95, 96, 100, whatever it is, and the community does not support it, then we're left with a default budget, correct?
Yes.
So 91 is a lot different than what they're asking for me. We could potentially run the risk of coming in at 4 million less than what is requested, right?
So default budgets are tricky things. Default budgets were never meant to be something that you compared your yearly budget to. The way that it was formulated has created this race to the bottom, where a default budget is calculated off of a necessary component of your current year's budget. So the lower your budget is, the lower your next default budget is. So if every year you beat your default budget, then every year you have a lower default budget to beat next time. The default budget was intended to make sure that a district could meet its core responsibilities if a budget did not pass. It was not intended as a comparison point for that budget. I realize that people do that, and it's tempting. And it's reassuring to know that the default is there if we need it. But I am of the opinion that if we use the default as our comparison point, which we have in past years, we will gradually drag the district down in a certain pattern, and we have to be aware that that's what we're doing.
So I'm not suggesting that we compare to the default budget or use that as our guideline, but my concern is that how do we potentially see an increase in that over time? Is it incremental budgets year over year where we would see the default kind of go up, or how do we get out of the situation where we could be running the risk of an unapproved budget?
We will always run that risk. And that's okay, because if the voters decide that they would rather we have a default budget, that is an absolutely fair thing for them to decide. What we need to have, and again, I'm voicing opinions here, others can certainly weigh in, is we need to give them a true choice. And say, here's what it would take to fully fund the district with the priorities that we're seeking, and here's what the default is. And they can make that choice. They're sensible, intelligent people, and they vote. And they may at some point hand us a default budget if we miscalculate. But I think that if we try for that reason to play games with convincing them based on the default, I think that gets tricky.
Agreed. And two quick things on that. I don't have the exact number, and I've always asked for this, but I don't know how to get it. A 3% increase or a 5% or a 10% increase on a school budget incrementally to a homeowner and a taxpayer is a lot smaller than we think. And I wish I had like a per million increase on that number, but I think it's like $20. Don't quote me to that. And in addition, and Chuck has talked about this many times in the past, we continue to kick things down the road, and we need to get somewhere. The SAU, if we had done it 13 years ago, would have saved us $5 million. So as much as I agree that we don't want to, I don't want to pay more taxes, but we have to get some stuff done, or it's our district, the school board's goals are going to fail if we don't get some stuff done. So,
Our
yeah, I just
students are
wanna
going to
keep that in
fail.
mind. Which is, at the end of the day, it's our students and our kids, and that's why we're here. So, let's keep that in mind.
And people can complain and complain and complain and say the state should take this responsibility. But then if the state takes that responsibility, we're going to get an income tax someday. So you're going to be paying it no matter what. So either pay it in the town in which you live in, your kids are going to grow up in, and you're invested in, or you pay it down the road and it's split over even more students than your own. But
Chuck?
I'd just like to mention that we give a lot of information about the district-wide budget. And there are some things that are two different things, but they're called the same thing. And they're not the same thing. And we need to be aware of that. One of them is the YES program, which is not the YES program. It is a different program. And it operates differently, and the costs are different. The other that I would mention is professional development. There is some professional development that is a matter of contractual obligation. You've got to provide for it. There is other professional development that doesn't fall into that category at all. And then there's professional development relative to curriculum, which I think Dan was referring to. Again, it's not all the same thing, even though it's professional development. So we have to be aware of what the genesis is of that need, as opposed to simply going, oh yeah, it's professional development.
Thank you. So, we could continue. It's getting a bit late. I will say this, I would suggest our next meeting, the 6th, we're likely going to go till we're done. So it may be a bit of a late night. We have things to get through. If folks decide to talk a long time about a particular line, that's great, but that will stretch our time into the night. So if you have responsibilities after this, tell your babysitter that they may be at it a little longer than usual or things of that type. Is there anything else people want to put here? Remember that we do have comments coming up, so you can hold the basic things for there. Anything else on what we were talking about?
No, but
Great, thank you. Okay, in that case, we move into certain housekeeping type items. Our next meeting is on the 6th, the same time, same place.
can we rearrange so everybody can see that?
We could flip it round, perhaps. We have to stay centered on this arrangement for them in certain ways. But yes, we can look at doing a better job.
And you could put public on the side,
Ooh, I like that plan. Yes.
and then we could get the snacks easier. They wouldn't be so far away.
Could you drop me an email so I don't forget to check with facilities?
Yes.
Thank you.
You never think about me, Lee, ever.
Okay, opening public participation?
I just have one question.
Yes.
Would you like Jenna and I to come on the 6th to do a quick thing on the central office? Or is that something you'd like us to wait on?
So I was going to suggest it when you were talking, and then I realized our 6th is going to run long anyway, but the 13th, it could be a good
14th,
match for.
okay.
The 13th, yes.
Oh, I can't do the 14th or something.
13th,
13th.
3, yes.
All right, okay, I think I can do the 13th.
Great, yes. If that, again, we have a liaison, so I'm assuming
No,
that,
the 13th's fine.
okay,
I just need to check with her.
great.
But so if you're scheduled, I have a feeling that some people who may not be in attendance might be fixated on that. We should just move them along.
And there'll be opportunities at the deliberative session as well, so,
Correct.
yes. There will be, we're just giving another opportunity for
See what
this piece.
happens when I sit here?
I think you should sit here more often. Okay, committee comments. Yes.
Okay. I have kind of a lot to say. I apologize because it's late. I am going to start with, I brought along the summary of the goals that the school board did in June, and I read a couple of them I know already. I think I'm going to summarize them pretty briefly, but what I wanted to stress about these is, which I already have really, is really how collaborative this process was. It was the whole school board in the room. It was Bill, it was Amy, it was Matt, it was our Director of Human Resources, Melissa Faslick. Who am I missing? There was someone else, I feel like. Lori.
I was just going through everything.
Who else was there? Was Jason there? No.
Jason Pelletier came.
Yes,
from
he was
PART.
there.
So I know, because I knew earlier, we were talking a little bit about, do we go down to the other administrators, the next level? They come to us, we don't go to them, but we do, if we have something like for Harley Hall on ELOs or, gifted and talented, we will request for them to come to a school board meeting and present.
Yeah, I was referring more to for, maybe the 5 people watching, so that they knew that the superintendent's office, they are at that level, the admin, and then if they need you, they come up to there. So I was trying to clarify that.
All right, thank you,
step.
yeah, that's good.
But yes, because see, I pay attention during the meetings.
All right. So we had this meeting, and it's facilitated by a person from Primex who comes with a whole, like flip charts and sticky notes, and we brainstorm and we stick things in places, and then we do small group work, and we come to these conclusions based upon the input of all of these stakeholders. And so this year we came up. This year was different too, because it was our second year. We also went over during this process how we had done on the goals from the year before. I'm not going to go into that too much but I will say that we got a lot done, like a lot. The switch to science of reading was one of the big things. The passing the teacher contract was one of the big things, because that's done wonders to improve our teacher retention. But this year's goals were create an engaged, inclusive, and collaborative district culture built on mutual trust and respect. And that included staff, that include valuing them for who they are and their contributions. That included cultivating connections and making, I'm just summarizing it, we aim to create a school community where all stakeholders are invested in the well-being of staff, students, and the community. And we had a number of strategic objectives associated with that goal. One of them is the strategic plan, which we're in the middle of working on, which is going to be done in a couple of months. Consistent expectations for staff through job descriptions and evaluations, investing in social emotional well-being of staff, students, and families, reducing turnover, like all sorts of pieces to that, creating an engaged, inclusive, collaborative culture. Pathways to graduation. The summary for that one was create multiple pathways to graduation that include robust course offerings, responsive programming and intervention, an engaging learning experience for all students. This goal seeks to address the learning and curriculum gaps that exist in the course offerings and programs that lead to the successful completion of high school requirements. Some of the action items, the strategic objectives for that were reviewing, improving, and modernizing the high school program of studies. I just made a note that all of these things also had timelines associated with them, and some of them, since we did this in June and it's meant to be like a year, 18-month sort of process, a lot of them are coming due like now or in a couple of months, so they maybe didn't land as much on this year's budget, but they will be landing on next year's budget. So this particular one with the high school, they've been charged to present their findings to the board in March, when we'll decide and take action on those. One of them was developing and creating innovative ways to earn high school credit, which we've done with our ELO program. Develop and create a system to identify struggling and at-risk students, which I think is partially covered under the PSAT testing that they're looking to do at the high school. And then, as I mentioned earlier, competency-based grading. The next goal was improve our learning outcomes by ensuring our instruction is responsive to the varied needs of our student population. The summary from that one, and this is a lot of words, facilitate a data-informed educational model that includes formative and summative assessments that focus on the improvement of literacy and math skills and empowers and equips students to meet their full potential. And we've got a number of strategic objectives here around how do we evaluate and track our progress in this goal? How do we use that data to address gaps and needs? How do we keep consistently updating our curriculum using an established process so that we're everything is consistent basically and clearly communicated and everyone knows what's going on, and those are kind of the gist of all of our goals. We want to do an audit of all reading, writing, and math programs, kindergarten to 8th grade, to ensure that they are research-based and aligned with best practices and district initiatives. The next goal is have facilities and equipment that are safe, secure, clean, healthy, current, and appropriate for meeting the educational needs of students and staff. Create and maintain a responsible 5-year capital improvement plan that addresses current and future needs for building, access and security, network infrastructure and technology needs, space utilization, taking into account educational programming, enrollment changes, and current projects such as the MHS Master-Cola Complex Master Plan, and that's ongoing with the able help of the Planning and Building Committee. We talked a lot about the capital improvement plan and which things on it we want to do this year in a previous board meeting a couple of weeks ago. Some more strategic objectives with respect to that were specifically, we decided in June, and this was unfortunately before we knew about the tax implications from last year, which, I mean, it's not even unfortunately, because this is a need, and it's a need that we haven't addressed and we've been continually not addressing for a long time. And we kind of came to a point where we were like, nobody's going to believe us that if it's a need if we don't start asking for it. And that's the central office building. So we actually had on our goals from June that we would put a central office building on the warrant this spring. So that's why we are pushing so hard for that, because we were like, nope, this just needs to be done. Then the last one, which we have not done as much on yet, but it's near and dear to my heart, is create dynamic relationships between the school district and community through clear and consistent communication. The summary was develop communication strategies to inform parents, connect with the community, collaborate with boards and committees, encourage engagement from community groups and individuals, and showcase and celebrate the many amazing aspects of the Merrimack School District. And the strategic objectives in this one were just to organize our communication mostly, make sure everything is consistent, make sure everything is clear, make sure we're highlighting the things we need to highlight, make sure people have the information they need, make sure that our policies are compliant and in agreement with district practices, because policy is an important part of communication. There was many years ago before COVID, a district communication committee. There's talk about getting that up and going again. So there's a lot going on there as well. The reason I wanted to bring all these up tonight, and I know the burning question that everybody has, is when are we going to see the school board's budget request? I would like to say that the reason we are so behind is because we had to miss 2 meetings, one during it due to an unforeseen circumstance in front of town hall where we weren't allowed to enter the building, and another one where there was a snow day, the day we had a meeting. So we're running about 3 weeks behind, unfortunately, because of those 2 missed meetings. What happened last night, if you watched the meeting, was we had a very brief discussion where it turns out we're all pretty much on the same page. The board in general feels like between all of these things we have going on and all of these priorities, we have on the warrant, we're going to have the SAU, the bond for the central office. We're going to have the next stage in our roofing project, which is roofs for JMUs this year. And we have the MESA contract, and I actually should have reversed that order a little bit because the MESA contract is like far and away
the most important. I would put the central office as second. And the roofs are really important. They need to be done as well. But, so those things are all coming into play. The other thing that's coming into play is, unfortunately, as everybody has addressed, the fact that through no fault of the budget, because I actually completely agree with whoever made the point that our incremental budget changes, if everything else stayed the same, don't actually affect the average taxpayer's tax bill that much. But everything didn't stay the same last year. We had that town see the loss of taxable revenue of what was it, $75 million, and everybody saw that in our tax bills. So we're trying to balance the needs of the district versus the needs of the community. And we asked that administration provide us with about $1 million of reduction in the bottom line of the operating budget. I want to say a couple of things about that. Part of the reason I arrived at that $1 million number, and I didn't say this in the meeting last night, I actually wish I had, is because the current request is $3 million over the default. And I also completely agree with all of the comments about how we need to provide the voters with a true choice. That just trying to beat the default budget is a game that we're never going to win. And this little piece of paper that I got from Matt, which I would love to send you, actually proves that, because there's 8 years on here where we played that game, and everybody's kind of seen where we're at, or where we were 2 years ago. 2 years ago was the first time that we have actually passed a budget over default, and it was about $260,000 over default. Last year was the second time we passed a budget over default, and it was about $1 million over default. And so for me, going from 1 million over to 2 million over just kind of felt right, especially because we're also asking for about $2.5 million in warrant articles. And there was something else I was going to say about that, but I lost it. Oh, I know. The other thing is, this isn't just going to be, we want them to take $1 million off. We've talked some about the surplus and how we have, the school board has the ability to use this surplus that we've retained. We used $45,000 of it for the new scoreboard last night. So we started with $500,000. We have $455,000 left. So some of these items that may come off, we will be able to fund at the end of this year with our surplus. So we'll be able to meet our goals that way. Some of the items, Ken used a good analogy last night, where, okay, I'm a homeowner and I've got a leaky sink, right? And all of a sudden my boiler goes. And so some of the items on here, they're the boiler that we need to fix. And some of them are the leaky sink, and we probably will defer them till next year, but we won't defer them forever. The whole board, that's not our policy. We want to do things right, and we want to get things done. And for me personally, the reason why I didn't go through and say, I want to do this, this, and this at the end of the year with the surplus, and this, and this, I want to wait till next year, is because we have been working so closely with administration. They have been working within our priorities, and because it's such a collaborative relationship, I really wanted that conversation to include them.
I'm going to break in briefly.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the board, at the committee from my perspective. I'm hearing you saying things that are important to hear, and people are no longer able to
Too late.
absorb them. So what I'm going to suggest is we put you first to talk to us before we begin work with the numbers at the next meeting, so that we have this stuff fresh in our minds when we go. So if you have things that you think we need to hear tonight, don't let me stop you, but let's give you time then so that it's something that people can take in fresh.
Well, that'll help the people that are not here too, because I was
Yeah.
literally sitting here thinking, going, how do I tell everyone to make sure they watch this section?
I will be happy to say it all again. I was actually just winding down, so that's fine. Well, and the short answer is we will have numbers finalized on Monday night. So I apologize. It really is short notice. But I guess my final thought that I wanted to share was, if you know that it's coming and you're kind of thinking about it, it should be, it's not, I don't think it's going to be any huge surprises.
And I will say, we will do our best to consider it, and if it's there, we will bring it to the table. It is tight to work in a reasonable, responsible way, so I can't promise that it's going to come to the degree front and center that it would have like 2 weeks ago, but we'll certainly be glad to see it. at that
Well, and
time.
I can always be like, I'm going to make this motion from the floor.
Absolutely, yes.
Could I just ask a point of clarification? So the 500,000 in surplus, is that what we voted that the school board can retain? So that whole vote worked in our favor this year?
Yes.
Amazing.
Yes.
Yay!
It's kind of an emergency fund that the state didn't let us do up until a few years ago.
Right.
And the town has always done it, and it's always had that extra for emergency situations, and we really needed it. Like, we had those bats in the
Well,
ceiling,
that was one of my
remember?
big
And,
things last
you know,
year.
Where are we
when-
gonna get $30,000 to take care of the
Comment,
bats?
committee comment.
Yeah.
Let's keep the important stuff for next time.
Well, that was one of my big things. So I'm happy to hear that it worked and it's in our favor, because that was like one thing I was really focused on the last couple of years, making sure that we had that advantage.
Yes.
Thank you for saying. Dan?
Yeah, unrelated to the budget, but you and I had spoke about me speaking to the motion that you must be present at these meetings, and I just want to make sure that we get that somewhere on the docket in the future.
So it was it was put on the agenda for the meeting that you and I discussed, and you weren't able to be present, I think, at that one. So I don't know if it can fit on the 2 meetings that we have left this time around, but we can certainly address it at the start of next season. Does that sound? Well, we can choose to put it any day we want. We can discuss it any day we want. It just seems that we're wrapping up to a point where at the moment it's moot. Okay. Other comments? Chuck?
We had such a favorable response from the administration relative to capital reserve planning. I would expect between now and the end of our deliberations to receive some capital reserve planning from the school board.
I think that is unlikely for this year. I think it is very likely for next year.
And why would that be the case?
I'm going to say that that could create a wonderful discussion to have at the next meeting and to choose whether we want to do that as part of our budget or not.
Well, if you would carry that message to the school board on
Yes.
our behalf, we had a very favorable reaction from the administration. And the sooner we get going on planning for specific items that we've been wanting for years, I think the better off we are. For me, waiting another year for almost anything is not terribly attractive. It was fine when I was 21.
So what I would ask, if it's possible, please, on that one is, yes, it would be very nice to have a clearer sense of when and why the school board chooses to support or not support such funds, and include them or not include them in a given year. At the next meeting, we can talk that one through if you're willing to do so.
I bet you it's on that priority list.
Other comments from members, please? Laura, was there anything we overlooked that you wanted to put out there? Okay, great.
You know what? I have too, because since I ended up on this committee, I've only ever seen one person, and not consistently, and never an extra school board person, and very little communication. So yay.
Yeah, I think we're going really good places with this.
Thank you for coming, Lori.
Yes. Okay, committee comments I will close, and we will accept a motion to adjourn.
Me.
Ellen has a motion to adjourn. Second is Gina. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Let's go home.